All three levels on the move. A trifecta addiction right here at the Voice of College Football on this fine Wednesday night. Yes, coming you in prime time, of course, 8:30 Eastern. Appreciate you being here, 7:30 Central. Leanne Herring right next to me as we break it down as we do each and every week. And again, we're going the pros, the transfer portal in college, and high school football recruiting, all three with the NFL draft coming up this weekend. Pull up, enjoy yourself, kick back, and leave those comments and questions. And we've got the call-in line. How about that? If you dare, give us a call on your favorite topics concerning the transfer portal, high school recruiting, and the NFL draft coming up this weekend. Leanne, good to see you. How are you?
I felt like we just saw each other a couple of hours, of course, on our Ole Miss live show, breaking it down. You were just on the Miami show. A lot of movement going on, of course. Arkansas, what's going on down there? There's a lot of movement going down in Arkansas. Of course, Miami, Mario Cristobal setting up to bring in some storms for the Canes, some big level guys off the board. And of course, we talk a little bit of NFL draft, kind of some last minute rumblings, kind of where things stand. But a lot of guys on the move. So let's get to it.
Folks, we're going to be jumping all over the place. Leanne's got a nice itemized list, as she always does, that's in fine order. But once we get to these comments and questions, who knows? So high school, transfer portal, back to the NFL draft, we're going to go all over the place. And we actually have a call coming in already. I will note this one item as well that is worth noting. The number one player in the country, Jackson Cantwell, has pushed back his commitment date. So he was going to announce next week, and he's pushed it back 2 weeks to May 13th. So Miami's in play, Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon for Jackson Cantwell. And so he is now looking at May 13th to make his announcement. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. We got Anthony on the line.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Leanne. How are you guys today?
We're doing
great. Good. Thanks for calling in.
Leanne, I have a question for you. You said you're an Ole Miss fan, correct?
Well, I am an Ole Miss fan, but I've been covering the Ole Miss beat for about 15 years. Started off as a traditional sports writer, and now I focus on recruiting, director of recruiting over at the Rebel Walk. But yes, been with the Ole Miss beat, covering Ole Miss Rebels for about 15 years now.
I have a question about Jackson Dart. Since you've watched him his whole time at Ole Miss, do you think he's a scheme-specific player in the NFL where he has to be in a certain type of play, like a certain type of scheme to be successful, or is he scheme versatile?
I think that when he gets with the right fit going into the draft, I think we'll talk a little bit later about how I feel about Jackson Dart. But having watched him, when you look at his resume, out of all the quarterbacks that are on the board right now, for me, Jackson Dart has the resume from start to finish. Of course, we know when he was out at Corner Canyon as a high school recruit, highly touted it, headed over to USC, really didn't find his footing. But when he headed over to Oxford, really came out of his shell. I know that there's a lot of draft analysts talking about that. Despite his ability, his flashes that he's shown at Ole Miss, is there really enough film? Is the way that Lane Kiffin runs that offense really going to translate for Jackson Dart? And I really do believe so. And I say this because I don't think that Jackson Dart from the jump, we talked about possibility of him possibly going to the Giants. We know that he's talked with the Browns. Of course, the rumblings are with the Steelers. But for me, Jackson Dart is one of those. Yeah, I mean that could very well be an excellent pick, and I like that you throw out there. I mean, if I'm Jackson Dart, I'm not necessarily concerned about being high off the board, and I say that because you talk about a fit, and I'm glad that you bring that up because so many high caliber guys, not just at the the collegiate going to the professional level, but even from the high school rankings going into the collegiate level, I like to call those guys conditional talent. Like you said, I think you have to put those guys that are elite, that are highly talked about. You got to put them in that condition, their conditional talent. You got to put them, like you said, in the right fit. Now, I think Jackson Dart, even though he may not have the strongest arm, I think his versatile skill set across the board, I think, and his leadership and the way he's willing to develop, I don't think he's going to go to the team and be the outright starter, but I think that he's proven at every stop he's made since his high school career that he's willing to put in the work and willing to develop. And again, when you got that kind of kid in this day and age, especially where we see the revolving door of NIL and so many things playing, Jackson Dart has really been a strong presence as far as what he's willing to do to develop. So I think outside his footballs and tangibles, he definitely has room to grow. But I think that Lane Kiffin has set him up for success, like many players that Lane tends to, because for being able to have Lane Kiffin's experience, not just what he's done to develop players at Ole Miss, but all his stops. But again, Lane Kiffin comes from a strong background, of course, the son of Monty Kiffin, but his time in the NFL at such an early age, I think really sets up what he's doing at Ole Miss. So I think Jackson Dart might not be the most talked about quarterback, but again, like many of the Ole Miss players, I think that they are willing to be coachable. They are willing to get better. And I think Jackson Dart has a lot of promise. Maybe not a starter from the jump, but I think his skill set.
So you disagree? You disagree a little bit, Leanne, when these that these analysts are saying that the scheme that a guy like Kiffin runs is not going to translate well into the NFL, like that these quarterbacks are not. It's like a one read offense and stuff like that.
And I'm, like I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about it later, but across the board, this is an older group of quarterbacks across the board. Of course, Cam Ward, Shadar Sanders, Shiloh out of Louisville, some other guys, of course, Jalen Milroe. I think in this group of quarterbacks, they all have very strong skill set, but each one of these guys doesn't have the prototypical NFL style. And what I kind of like to talk about a little bit later, I think this crop of quarterbacks in particular is an unusual one. Like I said, older group of guys definitely bring a lot of experience. But what's really interesting that I don't think a lot of people have brought up as far as the analyst perspective, this is one of the first drafts in a long time that really doesn't have any 3-and-out signal callers. Zero. And I think that that's a really interesting point. In fact, I think, which is really rare when you're talking about, drafting quarterbacks at the NFL level. You really are looking for some guy who's a 3-and-out kind of signal caller. Some of the top guys off the board, including Cam Ward, which is probably going to go pretty high, probably the highest quarterback, doesn't really have flashes of them. But what all these different guys like Jackson Dart do bring to the table is a strong level of skill set. And I think Jackson Dart has the ability to adapt and adjust. So I would disagree that he's one of those conditional talents. I think that the biggest argument where a lot of analysts use is that there's not enough film. And I think, for those who haven't seen him consistently across the board at Ole Miss, who probably got flashes of him, obviously, at the Combine and at the, Ole Miss Pro Day, they're judging from that. So that's a small margin to kind of take away. So, yeah, I'm going to disagree, regardless of my Ole Miss affiliation. The quarterback pool this year is very interesting. It's very different. I don't think that there's a typical prototype NFL guy across the board at the quarterback position. That's why I like Jackson Dart to go to the Giants, possibly even Miami, one of those teams where he can sit back, he continue to develop. Because I think that's one of Jackson Dart's strongest suits, is that he's a kid that he grows and he can develop quickly. And I think that given the right time, given the right home, he could be an NFL franchise quarterback that's willing to sit and wait his turn, but has a lot of opportunity. And like I said, talking about the Giants, I think that that's an interesting place for him. Miami could be an interesting place, but I disagree. I think Jackson Dart is not a conditional talent. I think he has enough ability and skill set in this pool of quarterbacks to definitely turn some heads and like he always does, really make believers out of people who don't believe in him.
Anthony, we appreciate the call. Thanks for checking in tonight. You're welcome back anytime. All right, let's go to our next call. We got our buddy Dan checking in tonight. Dan, what's going on?
Hey, good evening, Mark and Leanne. How are we doing tonight?
Good.
Doing
How are you?
good. Thanks for getting us warmed up. I love the callers calling in. So what you got for us?
Well, I got off of work earlier today to call in to the show tonight, so yay for me. But I wanted to get your thoughts, Leanne. Let's switch from NFL to college for this part of the show. Now, I've noticed a little bit between Ole Miss and Iowa State. You guys are in a bit of a battle of the transfer portal right now, at the moment, because I want to just say this, and I don't know if you listen.
You still there, Dan?
Yeah, I heard a little bit of a breakup. I got Iowa State's going head to head with Ole Miss in the transfer portal.
Hey,
that was
Dan,
the last take on it.
One more time. We'll give you one more chance. Then you'll be right here, so you can call right back. Dan, you there? All right, we'll keep moving on. Dan, you can call right back and we'll put you right on the line. And if for everyone else, we have left the link there in the chat if you want to call us on anything concerning player movement in college football, the NFL, and high school football. We got a USC show coming up with myself, Matt Zemek, and Ethan coming up at 10 Eastern tonight. This is our On the Move show with Leanne Herring, of course, that we do each and every week, and we've taken it to prime time. And so you guys have responded definitely the last few weeks, so we appreciate that. We do have another call coming in. We got Will ND checking in. Will, how's it going?
It's going good. What do you guys think of Steve Angeli? From what you've seen, do you think he'll be the favorite for the Orange, or do you think it'll be the LSU guy whose name I can't quite think of?
Ricky Collins?
Yes.
Well, I'm glad you kind of bring him up because that's who we're getting started with. I think that it's always good to have a quarterback battle,
Mhm.
and I think that there's a lot of strengths that Angeli brings obviously to the table. We know that despite him being an understudy out at Notre Dame, that he was key in pivotal moments. Of course, we know
Mhm.
that one of the biggest stages he had was that Penn State close win. Where he showed a lot of flash, a lot of promise during that CFP win, and he's been a staple for this, in the Notre Dame program despite being an understudy. But I think that Fran Brown, after that 10-3 season, really looking to find his guy. And I think, a lot of people don't realize that Angeli is a New Jersey native as well, prepped at Bergen Catholic, which is another top school out there producing a lot of caliber talent. So I think him going closer to home is a big factor in this. But again, I think that that a guy from LSU, even if he's not the starter there, coming from the SEC. So I think what Fran Brown having that quarterback competition between Angeli and the guy from LSU, got an SEC guy, and then coming off Notre Dame with a heck of a season, two guys that are proven track. So it's going to be interesting to see how that quarterback competition. But I think that this is going to be the moment, and definitely Mark can interject here. I think this is going to be the moment for Steve Angeli to really show off in Syracuse. And I think he's picked a heck of a program where he doesn't have to be the understudy anymore, where he really has the time to really, because again, he's had two strong seasons. I mean, he's been there for three, but I mean, the two last seasons that he had, even though he's been key in big moments. I mean, completing 11 appearances this last season for the Fighting Irish, 24, 36 passes. And that last season, not throwing an interception, which is huge for a quarterback. And then, the previous year, having a career high 504 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 1 INT. So when you look at those numbers, being an understudy kind of guy, still being able to produce and show film, I think that's key. But I think he's going to find his moment at Syracuse.
Will, you've seen about as much Notre Dame football as anyone, so I may turn it around and ask you, but here's my take on it, is that considering we just saw Kyle McCord throw the ball as much as anybody in the country and throw for almost 5,000 yards and set the ACC record for passing, I don't think either one of these quarterbacks, Ricky Collins or Steve Angeli, is cut out to take on that kind of workload. That's not what they want. If they do that, they're not going 10-3 this year. They're going to win like 3 football.
They have a much tougher
4
schedule
games.
too.
Yeah, it's a tough schedule. So I think Steve Angeli is the safer selection as the starting quarterback. I was surprised that Fran Brown, going into spring practice, was already naming Ricky Collins as the starter. Here's a guy that committed originally to Purdue, went to LSU, hasn't played at all, and he's being named pre-spring as the starting quarterback already. So I would expect Angeli has a slight edge. Of course, he's got some big game experience. Anybody was impressed with what he did. I think we would agree that Penn State was somewhat dominating that game and control of that game. And it was pretty big that he came in for one series and hit whatever it was, 5 out of 6 to lead a field goal drive and send them into halftime. So I would lean toward Angeli. Ricky Collins is a little bit more athletic.
So they open with Tennessee, right?
Yes.
That would be fascinating if him against Aguilar, the two transfer guys, and they picked Aguilar over Steve. So it would be hilarious if Syracuse could pull that one off.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting matchup. There's so many turns and tables, and I think like Mark was alluding to the fact that it seemed like Ricky Collins was going to be the guy, the athletic guy, really didn't have a lot of opportunity at LSU. But when you got caught, but Fran Brown hitting the transfer portal again, trying to see if he can bank twice on getting. I don't think either one of those guys, like Mark said, is going to be a Kyle McCord. That's a very high. That's a very high ceiling to come after and to enact to follow. But I think that they made the right move. But again, you see, it's going to be an exciting forefront when you see, like you said, Joey Aguilar was the guy. He was the guy at UCLA. But then, as we say, the dominoes start falling. The transfer portal, NIL, so many factors outside of football these days tend to move things around. So, but yeah, I'm gonna love to see that matchup if it's Steve Angeli versus Joey Aguilar, in Tennessee, two guys that have kind of just kind of had a lot of potential, have opportunities, but now are going to go head to head and really show what building your roster on some transfer guys can make or break a program.
And Leanne, can you give me your one Steve Merrill under the radar transfer portal player that you think will break out that not enough people are talking about?
Well, we talked a lot about him, and I might as well bring him up because I think he's fresh on everybody's mind. I recruit a lot of kids out in Texas and Houston. So Houston, making that transfer, obviously from Conference USA, making the big stuff to 12. There's a lot of talent that comes out of Houston as a community in the high school, but also in the college ranks. University of Houston has really been a hotbed, not just for talent as far as transfers, but also coaches. But one guy I think that is on everybody's mind, we've mentioned it on the Ole Miss show, we've mentioned it on the Miami show, we're going to mention it here, is safety AJ Halsey. Of course, he's a former All-American, Big 12 SEC safety. He's right now at Miami meeting with them. He's LSU is one of those teams that we just heard is in the mix for him. This is a guy that I think is going to be a breakout transfer player. There's a lot of guys. Now, if Mark knows, if I had some time, I could probably pick out some linemen, but I'm going to talk about AJ Halsey. Like I said, this is a kid that's going to be an emerging downhill safety. Had 2 great seasons at Houston, played in the spring game. I actually saw him a couple times this weekend in rep. So it didn't seem like he was leaving. He was going to be a projected starter this upcoming season. But like I said, a lot of tables, a lot of moving parts. And then he enters the corner, a big hit for the Cougars as far as their secondary, but someone's about to bank with him. He brings a lot to the game. We'll break him down a little bit later, but I think right now, for where things stand as the portal closes, one of my guys as far as the secondary, because we know that the secondary across the board for many programs has been an issue this offseason, trying to fill it as an immediate voice. So I like AJ Halsey out of Houston to make big moves. Miami seems to lead, but like I said, LSU's on the thing. I see a lot of other schools trying to get in that last mix before the Friday portal closes.
All right.
Okay, Will. Anything else, man?
No, just thanks for your time and wanted to chat some Steve. So thanks again.
No, I love it, and you set us up perfect. Like I said, he was the number one guy on the notes that we were going to open with, so you set us up nicely for that. So appreciate you calling in, and glad to jump around the board. Call back on the next time. We'll set that up, but glad to have you on. Thanks.
For sure.
Thanks, Will. All right, our buddy Will and D, and I believe Dan's going to give it another shot here. Dan, welcome in tonight. How you doing?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there, Mark, but that was weird. But yeah, Leanne, there was a couple things I wanted to ask you about last week, but obviously Mark has his rules. No disrespect to Mark, but like I said previously, Ole Miss and Iowa State are in a battle of the transfer portal. But I wanted to get your thoughts on Iowa State as far as this year's concerned. But I'll tell you this: what I think about Iowa State this year, not Ohio State, Iowa State, is that now that they're getting guys out of the transfer portal, they got a good recruiting class coming in 2026. I feel like they're really going to be a powerhouse, and not only just a powerhouse in the Big 12, but also in college football in particular. But the particular part of Iowa State I'm talking about is their running game. They got a few guys that I was talking about with Levi, Peppers being one of them, resembling more of a Marshawn Lynch or LaDainian Tomlinson, a guy who can open up defenses and be able to run, put it into third gear, and just keep going. So I wanted to get your thoughts.
Well, so
think,
if I can interject here real quick, Dan, is there any particular reason why you're so high on Iowa State? So you called our guy Levi, you said the other night?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. That's awesome. I can't imagine that we're going to provide much more on Iowa State than our guy Levi, who covers Iowa State and runs the SB Nation site.
And I understand that, Mark, but I wanted to get Leanne's thoughts.
Sure.
You know, because like I said, Ole Miss and Iowa State are in a bit of a battle of the transfer portal now that, you know, Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin, they're starting to build up a roster. Now, Iowa State's really building up their roster. So I wanted to get Leanne's thoughts.
well, it's funny you bring up Iowa State. You know, the Big 12 was really we knew a couple of years ago when Texas A&M left the Big 12 that Texas was pretty much the dominant team. I still, Mark will know all the time. I still have a hard time differentiate that. You know, Texas A&M or Texas are now SEC schools and not longer in the Big 12. But I think when you lost those two schools, that it really opened up a lot for the Big 12. Like I said, Houston coming into the mix. Iowa State had a really good run. Last year, you know, being able to build. But, you know, I think that's one of the key things that we're talking about. I haven't had a lot of time to break down the Iowa State, but again, a lot of teams we see are very much having to build their roster on transfer portal. And we say this constantly, not because they're not taking a chance on high school talent, but again, we see that immediate need, that immediate void. And coming off spring ball, a lot of teams are looking not only, we talked a lot about it on the show, across the board. But I think two key areas of having to that a lot of teams are focused on, of course, is that secondary. Another big key target has been those offensive and defensive linemen. But you mentioned up about opening that run game. I've always said it from the jump. I think for a long time, running backs and the run game were very much underrated and underestimated. We knew that a lot of teams, even the high power teams outside the Big 12, before Texas A&M and Texas, we knew that in the Big 12 it was technically a conference, you know, that was historically about spreading the ball, not so, and you know, the air raid. Of course, you can't talk about Big 12 football without talking about the air raid. But you know, those are all great and dandy, but having a strong run game, and I think that's going into a lot of different things, because you know, I've always said if you can eat time off the clock and you can run down the field and make plays and end every drive with some kind of points on the board, whether it's a touchdown or whether it's making a field goal, you're in a good shape. So, you know, I think now we're seeing the more importance of rosters going after strong running backs, and not necessarily your high grade 5-star kind of guys. When we're talking about high school guys or your high level, you know, transfer guys. But, you know, Mark and I have talked a lot about it, that teams like Iowa State looking to build a roster have a real opportunity, if they play their cards right, could make a strong run in the Big 12, potentially setting them up for a nice, you know, postseason. But again, we're seeing that a lot of trends, especially when it comes to running back, places like Ole Miss and Ohio State and big conferences, that they're leaning towards guys that are coming from the FCS level. So it's really interesting to see the approach to it. We're going to talk a little bit about Miami, you know, here in a bit. And one of the running backs that they're looking at, FCS school, you know, but some of the guys we're talking about Ole Miss taking a running back. What was it, Mark, from Troy? You know, so we see a lot of guys that are really translating at that next level for some of these powerhouse conferences, even at a place like Ohio State. They're looking for a bigger stage show, Iowa State. So a place like Iowa State has become a more ideal place for a lot of these guys, even a lot of these top caliber transfers, especially at the running back or the wideout position, because they have an opportunity to not just get more film, but develop, but more importantly, be instant impact players and finally get, you know, some playing time.
And I can agree with you on that, Lee. And to answer Mark's question of why I'm so high on Iowa State, is I was not only talking to Levi, but I was talking to a lot of folks that I know that are Big 12 fans. And I'm like, Iowa State's a team who last year had a great season. But here's the other thing that I'm concerned about. And this is coming from an Ohio State fan. Understand this. Now, I'm concerned Iowa State could break down our defense pretty easy with their running game, but not only with their running game, but with the passing game that they've got coming up soon. They've got guys that in the recruiting, process for 2026 that could really mess up our defensive schemes because we play a lot of that 3-4-4-3, 4-2-5 scheme of a lot of, hard-nosed defense. Because if we play Iowa State in the playoffs, even if it was at Columbus or there, or, in the Orange Bowl, it could cause us some problems, and that could cause, some headaches because now, losing to Iowa State doesn't just mean we lost to a team that has a very highly talented offense, but also a team we need to study more. How do we prepare more for a team like Iowa State? Now, I'm not trying to be, biased, but, that's kind of the one thing. And even my friend who's a big Georgia fan said if they were to play Iowa State, their defense is based on guarding against both sides of the offense, the running game and the passing game. But if they can't do that against Iowa State, then that's going to cause them huge problems. So even if that happens, and which I think it will, that really could shake up things in college football. Even if they won, say the first game in the postseason, like the Sugar Bowl against Ohio State, they beat us by like 2 touchdowns or maybe 3, a close game. It's their offense that beat a number 1 defense in the Big Ten, but also their offense could also beat a number 1 defense in the SEC. Noted. So, and then as far as Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss goes, my thing is as long as they can fill out the spots that they need, especially on O-line, and especially, being prepared against Georgia, a team who I have a lot of respect for, that's my one other thing about Ole Miss is that I would just tell Lane Kiffin simply just fill the holes that are needed, most necessary. And then, in 2026, recruit the guys that you really need. And then once that time comes, get that team ready, get them ready to rock and roll for the next season, because you don't know who you're going to play next. That could be a tough physical team like Ohio State, Georgia, somebody like on that level. On the road, at home, neutral site, you don't know. The world of college football is unpredictable. And
here's the deal, Dan. Here's the deal. I appreciate you asking about Iowa State. Certainly they had a great year, as you and Leanne just pointed out, made it to the Big 12 championship game last year. Matt Campbell's phenomenal. He's arguably the best coach in the conference. He's running a great program. He lifted them out of 3 to 4 wins per season to a level of 10-3 last year. Excellent football program. So they're going to win because Matt Campbell's still there, and he knows how to develop players as well as anybody in the country. Rocco Beck, their starting quarterback, is back, and with Shedeur Sanders gone, they have arguably the best starting quarterback returning in the conference, along with Sam Leavitt of Arizona State. And when you mention the running game, they have flooded the NFL with top backs over the last 5 years. Guys like David Montgomery and Abu Samu is coming back as their leading rusher. Last year, he had a great freshman year. So you're right. But the bottom line is Iowa State's like a number 30 team in the country. So if you as an Ohio State fan are concerned about Iowa State, then you probably should be concerned about a few other teams in the Big Ten first.
Well, and here's my thing, Mark. As far as the Big Ten goes, I needed just be a bit of hair concerned, but not much concerned. But as far as like outside of the Big 12, outside of the Big 10, yeah, that's kind of the part where I'm like starting to see it coming, to happen. Now, please don't judge me about this. Now, this is just my personal opinion, Mark, because I'm not trying to be the guy that comes on here and says Ohio State's the gods of college football. I'm being honest 100% of the time on here. All right. But the only reason I'm worried about Iowa State, Arizona State, BYU is that if they're really stepping up their game and they're saying, hey, we've got talented teams that can play at the highest level, especially somebody like BYU, physical defense, great offense, and especially with Iowa State and Iowa State, Arizona State, they're going to start reloading their rosters. And I may sound like an idiot saying this, but I'm just giving you and Leanne my honest opinion here. Now, I'm not trying to say, like, we're going to lose to Iowa State big time. Like, I'm saying we'll lose in a great game to Iowa State or Arizona State or BYU if it happens. And I told my Big 12 friends that are BYU, Iowa State, Arizona State, et cetera, fans, I said, if we lose in the playoffs to somebody like that, I will give their team credit on this show for beating Ohio State. And not only beating Ohio State, but if they beat Georgia and Ohio State, okay, now you earn my respect, because you not only played a team that is a national championship caliber team, but also has a track record about it. But not only you just put up the biggest upset in the playoff postseason, but like I said, Mark, the world of college football is unpredictable, and you never know what it could happen. Like, for example, TCU in 22, they beat Michigan and then went on to play Georgia. I was shocked when TCU made the playoffs, just being honest. So like I said, Mark, the world of college football is unpredictable. You don't know what could happen when or where, or time and place. That's like kind of the thing where I'm like that I'm realizing at this point is that it's no longer, the pillar of OSU. Ohio State's no longer on the pillar of,
we get your point, Dan. Yeah. We appreciate your call. Do you have any other points to make?
There was one other couple questions I had for Leanne as far as Ole Miss is
concerned. Just before you get back into Ole Miss, kind of just interjecting here. I think to your point, what you're trying to say, it's not necessarily that Iowa State is going to be that guy. They're going to be that person. But I think overall what we're talking about in a conference like the Big 12, much like the ACC, a lot of top guys from the high school realm as far as recruits and a lot of top transfers are making these their destination schools. Why? Because they can immediately play. They're not going to go to a place like Alabama where it's saturated with high school talent. And I think that's kind of what you're trying to say. You could correct me if you're wrong, that's where the Big 12 could be dangerous, because there's a lot of guys that they're getting from the transfer portal that could essentially help make them a run. Are they going to go out there and be the number 1, 2, 3 school? But I'm saying, I'm going to go back. I know Mark's talked about and named some QBs that are going to be a threat in the Big 12. But again, Connor Weidman didn't really find his place at Texas A&M, goes over to Houston, has had a pretty decent spring over there. So what I'm saying is you got a lot of top tier guys making places like Iowa State, making places like Houston, making places like BYU a destination school, where I think that's kind of where you're going to, where play a team like Iowa State on a given Saturday, I almost said a given Sunday, we're not quite there yet, could upset a top team, because again, they're utilizing the portal to load quickly and immediate. Now, the only problem I see with this is that with the portal, it almost makes you one and done on your positions if you're completely relying on the transfer portal to make up your roster. So to your point, I see where you're coming from, how I think overall the Big 12 conference, much like the ACC conference, is a wide open conference where a lot of these schools where you wouldn't see a lot of top talent be gravitated to, but we see that, with the revolving door of college football, that places like Iowa State, like Houston, TCU, SMU, Baylor, outside the Big 12, some of these schools that you necessarily wouldn't hear a lot about are attracting and becoming destinations and hubs where they're building a roster that may be a one and done roster, but at least for a season, they can play against the big boys, like the Ohio States, like the Alabama. So I kind of see where you're going with that. And it's a great point.
And Leanne, you basically just stated my point that I was trying to say, but without trying to stutter as much as I should be. So I appreciate the help, Leanne. Sorry, my brain's going like about a 50,000 mile rate right now.
You are good.
But to Ole Miss, my question, just with their roster in particular, not just only with Lane Kiffin, but as far as their schedule goes, how confident are you feeling? Like maybe 9-3, 10-2. Like how confident are you feeling? I want to know your honest opinion.
Right now I can't see where we stand. I think that we're going to have a good season. We got a tough schedule ahead. Again, we, like many teams, we don't see a lot from the spring workouts. I don't take a lot away from the spring. We have a lot of competition going on. We know that the last couple of days, Lane Kiffin addressing the needs, of course, in that secondary, signing a cornerback, out of South Alabama. Then, of course, we have Therese Davis, a young up and coming offensive lineman out of Maryland, who's been signed to the board. So I think right now, Lane Kiffin, as far as what's ahead, it's very promising. I think that he's definitely addressing the needs. But again, I think it's too early to tell. I have confidence that we will have a strong season. And I think that Lane Kiffin and his staff are addressing those needs of the secondary and offensive line, especially. I think that was one of the sour points. We talked a lot about during the season. A lot of our post game shows, even with the wins and the losses, one of the biggest things that Mark and I and Ruby talked about on the Ole Miss Live was a lot of missed opportunities that started with the offensive line. Because while Ole Miss has a lot of depth and strong depth, when it comes to replacing an offensive and defensive lineman in a game situation, when you don't have a lot, it's not as easy to do it during game situations. So I think Lane Kiffin is going to the portal along with the high school talent, ahead in 2026 and even 2027. We talked a little bit about it earlier on the show, some of their top targets. But again, I don't think we can take a lot away from what we saw in spring reps. I always say that those are just small measures of what lies ahead. I think once we get to see that early preseason, a little bit of summer practice, we may be able to get an indication. But, if anyone can build a team off a lot of talent and development, it's Lane Kiffin and his staff. Again, he's running this program like an NFL style program. And I think the culture that he brings to the thing, he has an energy that teams really buy in. So not only is he attracting, like I said, guys with top skill set that are going to translate immediately, he's also, building a culture where guys want to play for him. They want to come to Ole Miss. And so I think that also kind of feeds the success that the team has outside just the football intangibles. So again, I don't have a good grip as far as to say, this is where we're going to go, because I still think that there's still little questions we have to answer. And I think, like I said, they're being addressed right now as we build the roster. But again, I have confidence that Lane Kiffin will make a run this season. And, he may not have the same kind of roster that he did last season, but I think he's still going to build a strong, diverse, from what he has returning, despite, what do we say, Mark? It's about 70% of the Ole Miss roster that's being overturned right now. But again, Lane Kiffin's always really good at answering the call along with his staff. With plug and play guys. I think him recruiting a lot of guys off the recruiting trail that are what you call utility players. We've seen, in this past season, he's taken a lot of young guys, especially a lot of transfer guys who were particularly brought up in one scheme and one bar that they've been able to adapt and adjust. We got a lot of defensive linemen, that are making the switch or vice versa. So I think as far as utility players, Ole Miss has done a good job, and I think we're going to see that benefit them down the stretch this fall.
All right, Dan, thanks for calling, but stop leaving your link in the chat. I deleted it about 4 times, and then I kicked you out of the chat. Do not promote your stupid shows here. That's not why we're here. All right, we do appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. The real MVP's on the line.
Hello, how are you guys doing today?
Doing good. Loving all these calls. You guys are keeping me fresh. I think we've talked a lot more than intended, but man, this is why I told Mark we had to do a call-in show. Always glad to have you on. So what you got for us?
Well, I'm not sure if you've seen the semi-breaking news that happened about 3 hours ago with the House settlement. It's basically been put on ice completely because the judge wants roster limitations, which is something that none of the Power Four or anybody thought was going to happen. They just assumed that the settlement was going to go through. So it seems like an interesting twist and turn in this saga.
Yeah, I did see a little bit. I did see that broke earlier, that they put it on, like you said, they've iced it down because of the roster limits, but I haven't had a chance to go deep into detail, kind of look at the things. I know that there's a lot of legal aspects. I feel like this is the season with NIL and so many moving components, so many players, lawsuits, vice versa. We're going to talk about Arkansas, being one at the forefront of with the Amaleva family and their lawsuit. So a lot of legal things going on that really we haven't been able to really see. I think this is really the year we've seen a lot more legal legal things at the forefront. But no, I did see that earlier, but haven't had a chance to delve into it as far as the details or where things stand, or get any intel as far as that yet.
So, Daryl, can I get this clear here? Because the last I looked at this was when the hearing first opened, that the judge, I believe her name is Claudia Wilkin, she had made the determination that there was going to be a settlement. She was going to approve the settlement, but there was a few changes that needed to be made to the settlement. And one of the things that she talked about was that there would need to be some kind of grandfather clause or some type of limitation on these rosters that come in stages, so there aren't like 5,000 athletes eliminated on July 1st. That's how I understood it initially.
That's my understanding in it. There was one quote, I can't find it right now, talking about the judge saying how people had just assumed that the first approval, basically, they assumed that meant I'm going to grand final approval, and that was a mistake on the party's part, because roster limitations is something that nobody's really talking about. From my understanding, again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert in any of this, I'm just reading posts on Twitter, gathering information, so anybody can please fact check me out there and want the most accurate information possible. It seems like not even the plaintiffs really wanted roster limitations as a argument for this. It just seems like something just the judge values as equitable and fair, and that's what she's going to be pushing for.
Again, I saw it completely the opposite. That she was the one that was fighting for there to be a grandfather clause to keep athletes eligible for the remainder of their current college careers.
I think we're saying the same thing, but I think we're saying it in different ways. Does that make sense, Mark?
Sure.
So anyway, they've got 14 days to phase in the grandfather and roster limits. Do you think it's possible for them to do this in 14 days? What do you think this is going to be like on the sports? Because I know, like, for SEC baseball, for example, they're basically like 95 Nebraska, and that's why they win. And they've got like 50 players, and only the ACC can compete. So I feel like this may help the health of college athletics going forward in some of the non-revenue sports, because it's able to level out the playing field more.
Well, for me personally, I'd have to look at the final decision to actually comment on it, because again, as I understand it, if she got her way, this was going to be, these roster reductions were going to come in phases, so that wasn't going to put a great amount of stress on any of these programs immediately.
And something outside of something outside of this that I saw that kind of ties in, that may not directly be involved with the roster limits, but something that I've seen. I've been covering Kentucky basketball for a while, but back on that beat. But one of the interesting thing is that there's a lot of players. Of course, the basketball portal closed up a couple days, but there was a lot of key players that are out of eligibility as of right now. But what they're doing is they're hitting the portal. They hit the portal in college hoops in hopes that the NCAA is going to rule for that extra fifth year of eligibility. So there's a lot of moving parts that they're hoping that, they're going to be granted those waivers. So right now, as far as the legal battles that are going on in college athletics outside NIL, but I really think a lot of these are driven, especially with like the roster limits. I think now that's a lot driven about what's going on in the NIL sector, as far as, there's so many financial aspects to look at this. And I think that that's one of the things that maybe is pushing back this again. Like I said, looking at that fifth year of eligibility. Now, how are we going to treat JUCO players? There's a big argument, especially in college hoops, as far as a lot of JUCO players that have moved up the ranks from FCS to D1 schools. They're making the big case that they're JUCO, that whether they played at JUCO, whether it be a football scholarship or they play JUCO basketball, that those shouldn't count towards their years of eligibility. So I think that that could be a reason why this case in particular was put on hold. Like I said, like Mark said, I haven't had the chance to look at all the new updates. I know that Mark has done a couple shows on breaking this down, but I did see that earlier. But again, I think that now we're seeing that a lot of things outside could be factoring into this pushback.
See, here it is, the real. If you look at the article I just brought up, So Wilkins, the federal judge, told the NCAA Wednesday that she would not approve the multi-billion-dollar antitrust settlement that is expected to reshape the business of collegiate sports unless they change a proposed policy for limiting roster sizes. So she said the NCAA's insistence on immediately implementing roster limits would cause some college athletes to lose their spots on their current teams, and that she could not approve a settlement that would cause harm to some members of the plaintiff's class. Blah, 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 blah. She suggested during a hearing for settlement approval earlier this month that the NCAA should consider delaying its new roster size rules to grandfather in current athletes.
Right. They want to, from my understanding, they want to gradually reduce it from 120 to 105 instead of just doing it immediately.
Yes.
But I don't think that's something that the conference is expected to happen and to be this big of a snag. I think that was something that everybody just kind of, from my understanding, I could have missed, I haven't been following this thing as nearly as intensely as some people, but from my understanding, this is something that people just thought that was thrown out there as like just a point the judge was making. But people didn't realize she had this much conviction in it to stop the whole settlement for it.
Well, she said the first day, she said, this settlement's going to go through the way it's currently structured, the framework of it, but I need both of these parties to go back and change about 3 things. And that was the one biggest point that she said you need to go back and change, because I'm not eliminating 5,000 athletes immediately on July 1st.
I got you. And I think that's probably the right decision from a moral perspective. I'm just curious the time frame of how long she's willing to grant them, because 5,000 people is a lot of people to eliminate jobs from just in any department. So I imagine that's going to be scaled over years, and especially it'll be complicated if you add the 5th year. I mean, as Leanne Harrington said, all these players entering the transfer portal because of Diego Pavier's initial JUCO claim thing. In my opinion, this is my opinion, I don't believe 5th year players should be a thing. You have 4 years to get a degree, just like everybody else. Take your 4 years. That's just my thoughts on it. Do you all are personally in favor of 5th year?
A 5th year in terms of a redshirt year?
No, just to have a 5th year. Just a 5th year for everybody. Not a redshirt year, just a standard 5th year for
a graduate transfer 5th year?
No. I'm talking about a uniformal 5th year. How everybody gets 4 years, everybody would get a 5th.
There seems to be so many different ways an athlete can get a 5th and 6th season that I don't necessarily think that should be a standard. No.
That's exactly what my thoughts are.
I think for me, you got to treat it on a case-to-case basis, because we see kids like, you got those kids that, fell in recruitment during their COVID years, and how, you got to take those considerations, and I can see where the JUCO kids, whether it be in hoops or whether it be in football, could be making a case that those years shouldn't count towards a 4-year university, because technically, when you look at it academically, you don't count the JUCO equivalent to a 4-year university academically. So I can see where some of those JUCO players, but again, like you said, it just takes one athlete to set things in motion. And I think right now we saw with Pavo, kind of setting the tone, and now you see it as a big slippery slope. But again, across the board, I still think it's a case-to-case basis, because you got so many turning parts, as now everybody's going to want a 5th year. And I don't think that, that should be the case across the board. I think that it's a case-by-case basis. I think that there's certain factors and rules that have to be set in order to be eligible for that 5th year. I do believe that the JUCO players should have the opportunity, maybe not necessarily to be granted a 5th year, but I also believe that JUCO players should be at the forefront to be able to have, aside from the guys that get redshirt, whether it's medical or for other reasons, that have the opportunity to apply for that 5th year, just because we treat JUCO academically different than we would a 4-year university stance. So again, I think that it should be a case-by-case basis. I don't think it should be a standard across the board, but I do believe that JUCO players should be allowed the opportunity to have that option if that's where they started out their career, regardless if they transfer to a D1's program, that they have that opportunity to apply for a 5th year. Are they going to be granted, guaranteed? No, but I do believe JUCO players should have that opportunity.
I understand that argument. I understand. I just don't know the complexities of the JUCO situation because I don't follow JUCO that much, and I know there's the amount of JUCO players is insane. Like just the raw amount of them that are making the jump is enormous. I don't know if the current NCAA has the infrastructure to account for additional people. It's already as much of a mess it is. So I personally right now don't have the faith for them to add JUCO players. Like if we had a more structured sport, I would feel better about adding them.
Yeah, I mean, I think just across the board, the rules and the regulations, the NCAA, I'm not necessarily a fan of for a long time. I feel like that's a dusty old book with a lot of rules that don't apply. They haven't been able to adapt and adjust, but I think that they still try to navigate and control the situation across the board. And I think there's a lot of rules and reform, but like you mentioned, there's just so many different areas of rules and reform that need to be going on with the state of college athletics in general, not just college football, not just college basketball, but just across the board, and not just only in men's sports but in women's sports too. But again, that's a big book to tackle it, and it's just like, where do you begin? Because when you constantly start getting up the hill, there comes something else that hits you out of left field, and then here we are again. So yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. And, since I am a Kentucky fan, I feel like I got to ask the person who covers Kentucky one Kentucky question. What in the world is Mark Stoops doing? I've got no confidence in him going forward. Like, we've had 3 straight disappointing seasons. We got Zal Calzada as our quarterback, which means we're screwed. We're going to have the worst quarterback in literally every game that's an SEC game this season. We're going to lose to Texas by like 35 points, Georgia by like 25. It's going to be ugly. Why isn't we just getting a fresh start? I mean, he's been there for a decade plus. I mean, he's the grandfather of the SEC at this point. Like, just get a fresh blood, get John Summerall in there, and let's get some energy.
As a Kentucky fan, a long-term Kentucky fan, and a person who covered Kentucky, that's actually where I got my start. Before going back to the Kentucky beat, I was there during the Joker Phillips area. You can only imagine what a heartbreak that was. Thank God that basketball was at the forefront, because we know so many disappointing losses. I think that was just a hard time for recruiting. If it tells you anything, I was covering Kentucky football and Ole Miss football at the same time. So definitely, we know that there's been a lot of building. Mark Stoops, I know when he came in, there was just something about this confidence about him that you felt like he was going to be the turnaround of the program. But I always say about Kentucky in general, as far as football is concerned, I've always really seen it as a Jekyll and Hyde, because they've shown so many flashes. I mean, look at what they did against Ole Miss last year. But it took the defense. It's always been a kind of a one-sided team. They've really never been able to play across the board. So I think that, there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of talent, but I don't know if Mark Stoops is taking the correct approach as far as where he's going with his roster. I think that there's a lot of flashes, but I don't think that it's consistent across the board. And I think that's the biggest thing Kentucky faces. They're not a balanced football team. They're either stronger on one side of the board, a ball, or the other. And I think that that's been the biggest plague. I think Mark Stoops has the ability and has had the ability to make a turnaround, but I don't think it's been across the board. And I think that's really what's made Kentucky suffer. There's a lot of potential there. I just think that they're going to have to rewrite the formula and try to find success, but it's been very tough nonetheless.
Yeah, and we always take one loss every year that just is inexplicable as well. Mark Stoops has done this throughout his entire career. 2021 was against that Texas A&M team that was, it was at Texas A&M. They were a decent team, but that Kentucky team should have beat them. We've lost to Vanderbilt at home. We're in the last 2 consecutive times we've played them, which is unexcusable because they're Vanderbilt, for goodness sakes. A Tennessee, there's plenty of times we're better than them, but we lose to them. I just don't see the vision that he's presenting to the Kentucky fan base. It feels like we're in a hard reset year, but we have the same coach as last year. I think if you want to do it this way, just give the Kentucky fans some reason to do it. Change up the offensive court. Well, don't change him up, because we've changed him up too much. That's a problem within itself. Change up the defensive coordinator. Change up maybe Vince Marrow has to go. We just need something to be optimistic about in terms of something new. It's just stale. And it's, frustrating because we're just in a same place we've been.
Yeah, and it's really good. It's really good to hear the frustration that you have as a Kentucky fan, because I think for so long football was on the back burner, especially even in the SEC basketball, and even with the changes we've seen, Mark Pope is still kind of treading and making Kentucky basketball in his second season out there, still at the forefront. But again, I've heard that a lot from Kentucky fans, as far as, we know that there's potential, but again, it's just been stale. And I think a lot of it has to go with how they approach the roster, and I think that that's really where it starts. You can change coaches, and I know you talked about obviously the offensive side of the ball when it comes to coordinators. There's been a lot of fluctuation. I think that that's also played into the fact that Kentucky hasn't found consistency, because coaches help build programs. And sometimes, much like, when we saw Mac Brown at Texas was on that high, but after a while, as great a coach as Mac Brown was, they had reached their peak, and I think Kentucky is at that point where they've reached their peak, but really haven't translated. I think there's still a lot of potential, but I think it starts with consistency across the board, but more importantly, finding a way to excite and build that roster. But I think that they're going to have to build it from unlikely places, and they're going to have to go get some guys out there that are hungry, but they're going to have to do it on both sides of the ball. Just recruiting heavy on one side and not the other, and having a balance. Now, you don't got to go make 5-star. I don't believe you have to ever build a roster with elite 5-star talent. I think much like we see a lot of other SEC schools, you got to find a Zen, meaning you got to go for transfer kids, you got to go for JUCO kids, and you've got to make Kentucky a destination place. And I think that there's a lot of potential. The fact that it's one of the only SEC schools right now, it's not extremely saturated, that could use a lot of help. And if I'm Mark Stoops and I'm his recruiting staff, that's what I'm pitching. I'm saying, we're in an overhaul. We need to turn things around. This is where you need to come, because we need some fresh blood in here. So again, it's going to be interesting to see the approach he takes off in this recruiting season. We're in the middle of evaluation season. There's a lot of talent, in our backyard in Kentucky, but I think that, the key is going to be consistency across the board with their coaching staff, and then also finding unique ways to rebuild the roster on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, and I what I would give for a 3-star quarterback, not even a 4 or 5, just a 3-star quarterback that's willing to play Kentucky for 4 years, I'm willing to give almost anything for that, because Kentucky at the quarterback position has been a disaster over the last 5 years. Outside of that 1 year where Will Levis took a billion hits and somehow survived. I mean, I thought Brock Vanderbilt was going to give us 2 years of consistency, which for Kentucky would be like 45 years. But no, he's retired from football, and this guy's just a retread, and it's just we don't have any consistency. Mark, you look like you want to say something, so I'll be quiet.
Well, we've had plenty of Kentucky conversations through the years, but to Leanne's point, when Mark Stoops first made any kind of inroads of success in recruiting, when she just made the statement about going outside the box and not doing what everyone else does, that's what he did to get some level of success. He didn't go south and try
north
to battle it out with Tennessee and Georgia and all those schools. He went to Ohio, he went to Pennsylvania, he went to Michigan, and picked up some of their better players.
Yeah, it seemed to work, but for over the last few years, it just hasn't worked, and it's just very frustrating. This is like almost a worse place to be than that night where I thought Texas A&M took Mark Stoops in the middle of the night, because at least with that, it was just like you felt an emotion. This, I almost can't feel emotion, because it's like going into the season, I know our ceiling is we're not going to make a bowl game. And that's just so demoralizing.
And I think too, when you talk about, I think the struggles, you go back to the quarterback position is such key. And we know that Kentucky hasn't found success at the quarterback. And that's also, that's another thing. How is Kentucky built outside the football field with NIL money? Because we know how much quarterbacks, even a 3-star quarterback at a smaller school, is still asking for quite a bit of chunk of change. So, that's also something that, Kentucky's going to have to consider, that where they're going to allot that roster building. Again, we're moving so much more to how we approach this, and that's why now, especially in the SEC schools, we see that the front office, the GMs, the player personnel guys are becoming even more prominent in these decisions. But that's also something that could be holding back is Kentucky may not be able to fit the bill as far as going out to get a quarterback. So again, like Mark said, where he found success was not trying to go recruit where everybody else in the SEC was doing, is trying to look at the unspoken. But again, when you're trying to, even right now with the quarterback position in the transfer portal, I don't know, Mark, offhand, anybody that Kentucky could go get right away that could be an instant impact player. So again, I know right now there's a guy that I talked about that's really promising, DJ Hunter. He's a high school recruit that just committed to Kentucky, really rising up the ranks. But again, that doesn't help Kentucky right now. And like you said, quarterbacks, got to translate. And right now, that's one of the biggest things. So it'll be interesting to see, but where he goes with that. But right now, off the top of my head, those are just some of the things that Kentucky's going to have to build. But when it comes to acquiring a quarterback right now, super slim pickings. But maybe he goes to an untapped area and finds a guy in the rough. If I'm on the evaluation trail and I'm on the recruiting trail, and that the quarterback, hey, go take a chance on someone in the FBS, someone that's a dog, that's, because you got nothing to lose if you're Kentucky and Mark Stoops. There's a lot, but there could be a lot better options taken, with a JUCO quarterback. And I know that sounds crazy, especially in the SEC with the kind of competition. But again, it's not working for you. So you got to move things around.
Daryl, just to outline your pain and make it maybe even a little bit more severe, you got to consider, and you already know this, that Zach Calzada, not only does Kentucky not have one starting quarterback, but if you go around the power conferences, you can probably pick out half the teams, about 35 teams, that have 2 or 3 quarterbacks that could probably start at Kentucky.
I hate to say it, but yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I was hoping we'd get Nico. That's how bad of a desperation situation I was. I was hoping for Nico. I was hoping for somebody that throws the ball 10 yards over like 30% of the time. Like, I'm bad. I'm in bad shape. The only thing I've got to look forward to is that week 1 game against Miami of Ohio or Toledo or that team, because we're going to look amazing against them. And then we're absolutely going to get our soul crushed by like South Carolina. I mean, we're honestly, I'm not joking. We're like the 15th best program in the SEC.
I know. Thank God for college hoops. Now I really understand when Kentucky fans are always looking for hoop season, because man, at least that's a glimmer of hope, especially, in the Mark Pope era. There's a lot of exciting recruiting. Like I said, most of my stuff when I'm covering Kentucky these days is college hoops. I'll tell Mark, man, I just wrote a lot more college basketball than I've written in a long time. So again, it's rough because, like I said, you're a Kentucky fan. There's a lot of potential. You've seen flashes of it. And I think that's the hardest thing. If Kentucky was just across the board year in and year out, didn't show flashes of potential, didn't make some big upsets, it would be a lot easier to live with. But when they're on the cusp and they've had the opportunity, I think that's what hits fans a lot harder.
Yeah, we were right there, especially in 2018. I know we weren't going to win that game, but we played Georgia for the SEC's title in Kentucky. I mean, I was hoping that game was going to be at least competitive. I mean, we lost by like 25 points. It feels like the gap between the ultra elite, Mark is the ultra elite. He's just an Ohio State fan, so he has no idea what we're talking about, us scrubs. The gap between the ultra elite and that next tier where Ole Miss has been and where Kentucky's hanged out for a few years is so massive. It's hard to describe.
Oh yeah, and like I said, covering Ole Miss, for going from Kentucky, Ole Miss wasn't much better when I first got on that beat. I remember telling one of the coaches, man, I mean, you guys got to give me something. I mean, I'm tired of talking about how we win all the parties. I don't want to be winning parties. I don't want to be telling recruits, hey, come to Ole Miss because we're winning parties. I mean, that's fine afterwards. The victory celebrations are great, but man, we need. But again, Lane Kiffin come in and changing things around. And I think that at some point, Mark Stoops is going to have to shake things up. And like I always say, when everybody's running away from the fire, you're going to have to take a chance and run towards the fire. So maybe Kentucky will take that chance, but I don't see it happening right then and there. But they got, like you said, they got to go find themselves a quarterback. And like Mark said, the disappointing thing is that that with all the, I hate to use the word tampering, but if there's some guys out there, you could probably get out there and probably get them to Kentucky, under the right circumstances. I'm not trying to promote that, but in this day and age, that's going on a lot. We see it a lot. So, Kentucky's going to have to make some smart moves, whether it be in the portal or something. But yeah, there's definitely got to be a change around, because this Jekyll and Hyde crap that's going on out in Lexington, it's getting real old when it comes to football. I'm tired
Yeah,
of just watching basketball.
Well, you're going to have to get used to it. Listen, those games against UNC Wilmington and stuff, that's all we got, man. That's all we got. But I mean,
I know.
Let me tell you, Kentucky is a basketball first state, but we've got the potential to be at least 7-5, 6-6, 8-4. I'm not asking to go 10-2 every year. I understand we can't do that. We can't do that. Ole Miss is probably where our absolute peak is as a program. Can we please just go 7-5 every single year? I'll take that. And that is our floor.
Yeah, and it's a possibility, even though, the state of Kentucky has traditionally been a, basketball state. You see, I hate to say it, but you've seen what Jeff Brom's done for Louisville football culture and what he's been able to recruit. I mean, producing a couple Heismans, I mean, Shu is one of those underrated quarterbacks that we haven't had a chance to talk to in the draft that could have big potential, big opportunity. So again, like you said, it's possible, but you got to make the right moves. And right now, Mark Stoops is, I said Mark Stale. Mark Stoops is a little bit stale in making those moves. So we'll see what he does this offseason, but he definitely has got to get some guys fired up and make some changes, no doubt.
Yeah, I've told Mark this before. If the goal was just for Kentucky football to be, as best as they can, I say ship them to the Big 12 or ACC. Just do that, and we'll be 8 or 9 wins right there. But like our recruiting and our talent, we got like top 25 talent if you look at the 24/7 composite. But if you look at in the SEC, we're like 15th or 14th every single year. It's like, my goodness, it's insane. I'm sure this is an Ole Miss fan. You're like number 15, but you're 11th in the SEC. It's insane how loaded this conference is, top to bottom, and that's why.
And really where it comes down to, you can have loaded rosters that look good on the rankings and the boards, and I take those for a grain of salt. But again, what I was going to is the fact that it's about translating. And again, Kentucky has recruited a lot of talent, but it hasn't translated. And that's where a lot of these SEC schools separates them, and a lot of these other big programs is that they don't translate, even though they are guys that come with a lot to the board.
Yeah, no. How's your team looking this year? I know we kind of ruined your season last year and ruined your playoff aspirations. So, sorry about that. Losing to a 3-9 football team probably doesn't look good for the committee. So sorry about that. But can you all make the playoffs this year, or are you going to take a step back? Because I haven't heard a lot of Ole Miss hype like I was last year, where some people were projecting them to win the SEC.
They say defense wins championships, and I always say you never know what happens when in the SEC when teams come to play, and Kentucky gave us a run. And I think what the biggest thing is, we had a caller earlier that was talking about, how I see is Ole Miss, what am I thinking they're going to go? I think we're going to have a solid opportunity, but you can't take a lot away from spring ball, especially with the way it looks these days. So I'm not going to sit here and preach that Ole Miss is on the forefront. Of course, we know building 70% of your roster, but I think right now the key component that I like what Lane Kiffin and his staff do is they're addressing the needs, addressing that secondary, really going after offensive and defensive linemen. Those were a big key component in our missed opportunities this past season. Of course, we're going to see the Austin Simmons error. We saw what he did in a short time, keeping us in the mix in that big Georgia win that kind of set the standard. But again, there's a lot of things that I haven't seen enough of yet, that I can't really take from watching clips and film and from what I know from the intel inside. So I think this offseason is going to be addressed in addressing those needs and filling those voids. But I think much like I told the caller earlier, as far as Ole Miss, I have a lot of strong faith that we're going to have another strong season. Now, it's not going to be the team roster that we had, obviously, where we could have make a run. But I think that where Lane Kiffin brings this balance and how these guys buy into what they do, and not a huge turnover as far as the staff, a huge turnover as far as the roster to the portal. Like, naturally, we've lost some guys to the portal, but again, there hasn't been a huge fluctuation where you're going to say, man, we're really going to take a hit from that. I think that anytime that Ole Miss has taken a hit as far as the roster that we've reloaded, Lane Kiffin and his staff are really good at finding guys, especially from the transfer portal, to help to help fill those needs. So again, can't say where we're going to go this season. I'm not going to put a number out there, but I think that the Ole Miss Rebels again will have a strong season. They may look a little bit different. They may have a little bit of, work out the kinks like many teams do in those first games. But I think that what Lane Kiffin is doing to address the secondary along with the offensive and defensive line needs is going to project, and I think is going to push Ole Miss to a strong start.
Well, that's good because I need a second team to watch this season, because if I watch only Kentucky football, I'm going to be very sad and disappointed by October, and I'm going to be completely out of any sort of race. We'll be on the graphic and we'll just be completely removed because we're so inconsequential. Like, you know how the CBS on SEC used to do it, where they would show like the top half of the SEC, and Kentucky, Ole Miss, Florida, they would always be. We're not going to be on that graphic, so I need someone else to kind of keep myself entertained this year. But Mark, I was going to ask you in terms of the transfer portal. And
I am here. Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm listening.
Here. I know sometimes you like to take a back seat in these things because you talk about how hard you work. So I thought, you just
talk about how
you
talk about that. I'm talking all day. Absolutely. Leanne's here to talk and Leanne's here to be the brain. So yeah. And other things. So I really got nothing covered here, but I appreciate the question, Darrell. What do you got for me?
In terms of the transfer portal and the spring transfer portal, some people are saying it should be the only transfer portal spot. The December one needs to go away. Do we just keep the December one? What do we do with this? Because it seems like it's too much of a mess with everything that's happening in December to have these two windows.
Well,
and especially with the Nico situation, just forcing himself out. I don't really see the point of a transfer portal if somebody can literally just say, I don't want to play here. I'm not making enough money. I'm going to force my way out.
Yeah, so I like to be well thought out on these things and not just make a snap judgment, but something's got to be done. And I do believe that we probably only need one transfer portal window, or if we continue with two, that they have to be limited to a smaller period of time. And maybe we become more uniform with our spring practices and the time in which that's what extends the window as well, is that you've got teams that are starting spring practice in late February and you've got others that are starting 6 weeks later, and it makes for this super, super long transfer portal window that goes on forever. And so that's part of it as well. But I just think that, to be fair to the athlete, if we're going to have a transfer portal window, that there almost has to be one in the spring, because they get that final look toward summer camp and where they stand on a depth chart, and they're making decisions based on where they stand at that point.
Yeah, I got you. Like, I like the idea of a transfer portal. I think it's useful. I don't want to see Nico Amalevu set the precedent of, I don't like how much money I'm making, therefore I'm not going to play. I'm going to threaten not to play. Therefore, you all have to let me go out into the marketplace. I don't think that's a good precedent to set going forward, because similar to the UNLV guy who decided in week 2 of the season just to quit on his team. I'm worried this is going to creep in to college football, of players saying, I'm having a great season. I want to be paid more. You're not paying me more. Well, I'm out.
Oh, I got you, Darrell. I think that that's going to be remedied partially by, I would have told you 2 years ago that I was dead set against this, but it's come full circle to the point that the only way that I can see to get reins on this is to make the athletes workers and assign them to contracts. And that's going to keep them in one place for a certain period of time, whether they sign a 1-year contract, a 2 or a 3-year contract.
So you just want to basically professionalize the sport, make them fully in place, and you're basically turning college football and college athletics into the NFL, the NBA, the MLB at that point.
Unless there's a way to legally limit the transfer portal, and I don't know that there is, because they're student athletes and they can go transfer just like any other student.
Right.
Because it's already been proven by the courts in defeating the NCAA that the transfer portal rules that they had in play were illegal for all that time.
Right. I think what's going to happen is the NCAA is going to have some sort of antitrust exemption. That's the only way the NFL, MLB, and NBA operate. So I think if you're going to make them full-time employees, you also have to have Congress step in and have antitrust exemption. But God help us if we need Congress to step in and save us.
Well, I've got to step in on this one, Daryl. So we appreciate you calling, and I'm guessing that you're happy that I'm doing a late night call-in show for all the times that you've told me that I need to move back to late night shows.
Well, it's more convenient for me, and it seems like you got more callers in the late night window. I'm sorry if I took up too much of your time.
No.
We love having you. We love having you, but I'm up against it because in a blast from the past, I've got like 6 shows today. So the next one is coming up in like 2 minutes on the USC channel, which I would love for those guys to take on by themselves, and will here very soon, but not tonight. So I'm going to make Leanne can do whatever she wants. Leanne, in terms of how you want to take on the rest of this night, we can shut it down right now. We do have 2 other callers. We have 3 more callers for you.
Okay, I guess I will funnel the next 3 callers. I haven't navigated sure? or what, or you know what we could do? I don't know. I was texting Mark right now because we still haven't hit. We love your calls. That's why we made it a college show. We still have a lot to hit. I don't know what Mark's availability is after the USC show, but we could go a late recruiting. I know he's looking at me like, oh my gosh, why are you asking this? Or we could continue this talk tomorrow, but enjoy it. But I think, like I said, Mark needs to head over to the USC show. I would like to have Mark on here just because I don't like to hear myself talk so much about recruiting, even though I talk a lot about it. So
come on.
So what do you think? So what do you
have you solo? And all you have to do is click out. But you do whatever you want.
Well, how do we? Okay, I love how we're having instructional. What do you think? What do you want to do, Mark? Do we go late night, or do we save this for the morning? I don't know what your schedule is. He's looking at me like, oh my gosh, Leanne, why are you putting me on the spot? So, but I'm gonna. Oh, I know, but we could do an early morning show.
Draft.
No, I know, but we could go late night tonight, or we go early in the morning, or we save it for the weekend. I don't know. What do you think?
Tomorrow or the weekend, either one.
Tomorrow morning. All right. Well, we'll be back on the move then. I guess. Man, I hate to not take some callers, but yeah. How do we navigate this? I don't know. I'll take the last 3 callers, close out the show, and then we'll get back to the rest of the agenda.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Just how do we do this?
I'm shaking a finger at George, at Adam, and David. At least we've got 3 reliable gentlemen here, so I feel semi-safe leaving this alone.
Okay.
All right, everyone.
Thanks for having me on, Leanne. It's good talking to you, and I look forward to talking to you next time, okay?
All right. Well, thanks so much for calling. Let's see how this rolls with just me being on the alone. It's terror chart water. So whoever's up next, let's move them on.
Okay, good luck.
Okay, thanks. Hey, how are you? I'm trying, like I said, first time going solo without Mark, but we had some calls in. Definitely want to talk about recruiting. I don't know if you can hear me okay with my audio, but what you got for us? Not hearing you on the audio. I see you, but can't hear you on that audio. Still on the audio. Let me see. Do you want to try clicking back in and back out? See if we can get you on board.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect. Can hear you out.
Sorry about that. I tried to hit that.
No, it's all right.
Yeah, my mute button. I apologize. First of all, I want to say as an Ohio State fan to an Ole Miss fan, thank you for Mr. Quinshon Judkins, who
it was great to see Quinny, as I like to call him, out there. Like I said, you gotta love these guys. Have the opportunity, to cover Quinshon while he was at Ole Miss. But man, I know a lot of Ole Miss fans. They kind of get at you. You got that select group like, why are you cheering him on Ohio State? But for me, from the recruiting aspect, when you cover these kids, you build relationships with their teams and their families. man, talk about a breakout year that he had for Ohio State. And I really, decided the politics, all things aside, it was really good to see, such a talented kid that, he's one of the kids that you want to talk about as running back, because for a lot of people that don't know, his background, this was a kid that wasn't highly recruited out of high school. This wasn't someone that was a 5-star player that was on everybody's board. Lane Kiffin took a chance. He did well at Ole Miss, was able to develop. But again, it was really great to see him have a breakout season with Ohio State.
Yeah. I think he was much needed on our part. If you notice the previous 2 seasons, Travion Henderson, the running back, did have some injury problems. And I think to have that second complimentary back was huge. And he put up statistics that were just amazing for you guys in the previous season. And, was a huge help. And, I think tomorrow's got a chance to maybe go somewhere in the 3rd round. I've heard 4th, maybe 3rd round tomorrow. It'll be interesting to see where he goes. But I think he could be a solid player at the next level, by the way. I don't know if you have some thoughts on that as well. Go ahead.
A lot of times when you don't see these guys, you got to see him obviously at Ohio State. I've had the opportunity to see him in high school and through his time at Ole Miss. And often the guys that you don't talk a lot about are the guys that translate, because, I always talk with Mark across the board. When you see the guys that really have that longevity in the NFL, those franchise players, as we like to call them, at numerous positions, it's not only guys that are versatile, that come from strong programs, but guys that are really willing to coach and develop. And I think that's the thing about Quinshon Judkins. He brings such a unique dynamic firepower to that running back position. I know a lot of rooms, I'm glad to see that a lot of the top conferences and the top Power 4 programs are really taking an extra effort to build those running back rooms with transfer guys, with 5-star guys out of high school, because I think that now there's really that need that you see. And we saw what we saw when Quinshon Judkins came to Ole Miss and being able to open that running game. That was a really sour spot for the Ole Miss Rebels. And I think when he came on board and really giving that opportunity, not just to be that crazy, signature spread aerial kind of offense that Lane Kiffin came in, putting those video game numbers, opening that run game, I think really took Ole Miss to the next level when they brought Quinny, on board. So I think he did the same for Ohio State. I think he's going to be a strong utility player. He's a physically bigger back. And I think that he also can serve. We see that, we talk about, speedy running backs, but also being a physical built kind of running back that brings that extra firepower, is also a
tackles.
Strong. Exactly, because I think that you can also utilize them, especially at the NFL, when you're going up against way bigger guys on that defensive front, and those defensive lines really helps them in that blocking and that tackling situation. I think Quinshon Judkins brings not only firepower, speed, but I think his physical frame, his ability to really, push on those tackles and make big plays, and really, take time off the clock. I've always said it about running backs and in the run game. I think 2 of the most underestimated things in football across the board, because I always say, no matter what level you're playing at, if you can eat off time off the clock, and you can put points on the board, and wear down some defenses. And that's why I think a player like Quinshon Judkins and a lot of the running backs that we're going to be talking about, it's always one of the least talked about positions at the college level, at the high school level, and especially NFL draft, yet is one of the most vital positions I think that you have to have in any aspect of your depth chart, no matter what level of football you're playing. So I think Quinshon Judkins is going to be a surprise pick, just much like I say, JJ Pegues is going to be that value player. I really don't, I don't think going the 1st round really matters as far as what's going to translate at the next level. And if you're an NFL,
just you get with a good team. Yeah, it's where you land that's going to be the big thing. Yeah.
And we talk a lot about it too, especially at the quarterback position. We haven't really had the opportunity to break down because we had so many great callers call in. But, one of the things I also look at is sometimes for some players like Quinshon Judkins or, some of the higher profile quarterbacks, you don't necessarily want to be one of the first guys off the board, because as we know, that's necessarily not the team you want to go to. We've seen Ole Miss definitely have historically some bad luck when they've got some really good quarterbacks go off that board to not some great teams that really have just kind of seen their career just kind of fade. So, I'm not all about Quinshon Judkins going early, but I think that whoever gets him, they're going to get a strong player that they can develop, that is going to compete.
Sure. 2 questions for you. An Ole Miss question and then kind of a conference comparison question. Um, First of all, just a kind of an overall program feeling on Ole Miss and kind of where they're at right now. As far as maybe a floor ceiling, maybe type question for you. Haven't heard your opinion on this, so I want to get it. You look at the last couple years, what Lane's been able to do with the team. You obviously had a very good team in 2023. I thought, Quinshon was really good. Jackson Dart, you had a balanced offense, I thought. Really, I thought this was going to be a year. I know a lot of people picked you to make the 12-team playoff this year. A couple of tough losses cost you. I know that Florida loss at the end of the year had to be and Darrell talked about the Kentucky one. Of course, I knew he was going to get there, of course. But just kind of your feeling about where this program is at right now as far as maybe floor ceiling. I mean, I know they had some good teams in the early 2000s with Eli Manning. I know they had the 14 and 15 teams, the Bo Wallace teams that beat Alabama in 14 and 15, the Hugh Freeze teams. I still think, by the way, if that stupid fumble play doesn't happen in Arkansas, by the way, that would have changed college football. 2 plays changed college football in 2015, by the way. The punt between Sparty and the team up north and the flip play between Arkansas and Ole Miss. Think about that. That changed the college football playoff in 2015. Mark's talked about it. I don't think it's been talked about enough, but 2 plays changed that season if you stop to break it down, by the way. But just back to my overall point, just where do you feel this program? Do you think you may have missed a window with the last couple of years to maybe make the playoff with, especially this year with it being 12 team, or just kind of your confidence going forward, with the ability to be a playoff team in the future?
Well, I always said, over the span of covering Ole Miss for about 12 to 15 years across the board, seeing a lot of coaching changes and transition, the talent has always been there. But I think when Lane Kiffin finally arrived, I think that he gutted out the program. There wasn't a lot of consistency. We talked about earlier, we were always about winning parties versus winning ball games. But I think now we finally reached that peak because Lane Kiffin has really just, I think, found his zen. He's really grown a lot as a coach. And I think his energy that he's brought to the program always translates to the field. And I think that, his maturity as far as his approach to coaching has really resonated with this team. I think that it's always hard to compare, the previous team to the other, because you're never going to get the same team ever again, even if you have players. And right now, we talked a lot about it. The biggest thing Ole Miss is facing is having a roster rebuild with over 70% losing their guys to the draft or, eligibility, all sorts of reasons. And I think right now, Lane Kiffin and his staff are doing a really good job in addressing the immediate needs. This season, in those big losses that, really hurt, this is not like it was a blowout. There were, what do we say, one score games, very close games we shouldn't have lost. But again, the constant topic that we talked about all season long in those post game shows, even in the wins, even in the losses, was missed opportunities. And I think that those missed opportunities really added up, and it's because the offensive line was a big, question for Ole Miss. They had a lot of guys, but there wasn't consistency across the board. And I've said it time and time again, it's a lot more difficult, especially in a game time situation, to replace an offensive lineman, a defensive lineman, especially when we're talking about center and tackle. And Ole Miss had some of those issues this season. And also I think one of the biggest questions coming off spring ball, like I've been saying in and out, spring ball is changed a lot, so you can't really take a lot away from it as far as where the team stands. We hardly see spring be a staple anymore as far as what. So I don't take a lot away about it, but I do know that the key thing that Ole Miss is looking is to help alleviate some immediate relief on that secondary. Going after getting additional 3 to 4 defensive backs and addressing that offensive line. And I think that that's the key component. And Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin is really good about doing that. He's already had some commits as far as those 2 key components. So I think right now the focus really as far as Ole Miss is addressing those immediate needs, and they're doing that from the transfer portal. I think that Ole Miss is going to have another strong year. They definitely aren't going to have the team that they had this year. but does that take away from the talent that they have ahead? I don't think so. Again, I think that Lane Kiffin is really building, and he's found this balance about getting guys to buy into the culture and energy. Even though there has been some losses to the transfer portal at some different positions, I don't think it's going to hurt Ole Miss going into this offseason. I think for whatever they lose, they have more than enough depth as far as what they're going to hit in the transfer portal. But I think Lane Kiffin has also done a really good job of building for the future. I think this is the first time I've really seen, as much as we talk about Lane Kiffin being the portal king and really building a roster and treating it like an NFL team, building it from the portal, as a recruiting standpoint, he's really making strong waves and strong relations in the high school realm, especially when it comes to offensive linemen. We had a lot of big guys, two big 5-star guys in Felix Ojo, one of the top offensive tackles in the country right now, make a visit, to Ole Miss. Johnny Jones out of Florida, another top offensive tackle. So again, I think that Lane Kiffin has found his formula as far as learning to build a roster. So I have good confidence that Ole Miss is going to have another strong team. Is it going to operate like this team that it was last year? No, I think there's a lot of turnover in that. We're losing a lot of guys. Again, it's going to be questionable as far as where we go with the offense. I think that the quarterback situation, I think Austin Simmons, he's a kid who's extremely intelligent. He came to was an early enrollee out of high school. He's really sat. He's been the understudy. He's really been a student of the game. He's a lefty. I think he's going to bring a lot of interesting new blood to that offense. But again, I think he's going to have some kinks to work out because again, we've lived in the Jackson Dart era for quite some time, been kind of spoiled. But I have confidence in what Ole Miss is doing this offseason. I think that we finally have reached the point where we have learned to play football for 4 quarters. I think that was always one of the biggest thorns in Ole Miss's side, is they would do really well in the first half of the ball game, but they couldn't close the ball game. A lot of missed opportunities. And I think this year, even though we had some tough losses against Kentucky, that kind of hit us for storm. That Florida loss really, really did us in. But again, I hate to say that. I saw that one, being a game. I know everybody thought that we had that in the bag, but
Florida was playing good football, at that particular period of time. You know what I mean? They were closing the year strong.
And it was because it wasn't solely because, but I always am going to be a big fan of DJ Lagway. That's a kid that I watched coming up the rising ranks out of Willis, Texas. He was not the most highly recruited guy as far as some of the other Texas quarterbacks coming out of that cycle, but having watched him and how he operated when he took the reins in that chaos that was going on in Florida, I truly believe that he helped save Billy Napier's job because he got the guys to buy in. I think that when they saw DJ decide to stay, I'm talking about, a kid that wasn't talked about that eventually became the Gatorade Player of the Year, made a deep run in a, small Houston school, really was making a name. But again, I think when he took the reins, he's a kid that translated, which you rarely don't get to see when it comes to a quarterback. We see a lot of elite quarterbacks. So, I knew going into that one that definitely wasn't in the bag for Ole Miss, and unfortunately, I was right about that one. But like I said, I had a lot of faith in DJ Lagway, and as much as faith as I had in Jackson Dart in that defense. Again, it just goes to show on any given Saturday, a team can give any run for their money, and shut you down and dissect you, and that's exactly what Florida did. But I think now, having gone through those losses, that gives Ole Miss a kind of list of what they need to address this offseason, and I think they're doing a good job of it through the portal and through high school recruiting, building for the future. And like I said, really like where Lane Kiffin is going as far as what he's taking the approach to the high school recruiting and building some foundation with some key components, and not just relying on the transfer portal, because as much as you can build a roster on a transfer portal, I said it earlier that that can often be a one and done. You can build a star-studded roster, but when you're building it with guys that have exactly. When you're building it with guys that are going to translate, are going to be dogs, they're going to push it, but you're only going to have them for a year. And like we see it now, we see a lot of guys that are signing, but they're hitting that winter portal. They come in, and by the time spring goes, they don't like the way things are going, and they're back in the portal. So again, there's not a lot of guarantees, even if you go and you take that building that roster with transfer talent. So a lot of slippery stuff. But yeah, I like where Ole Miss is heading. I'm not going to put a number yet because I haven't seen Austin Simmons in game situations. I think when we see him in those preseason games, kind of how things are operating, I'll be able to have a bigger grasp for it. Because like I said, can't take a lot away from when you play your team. I think you take a lot away from when you see kids in game situations.
Last question, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this, being a fan of an SEC team and me being a Big Ten guy. There's been a lot of talk on this channel, and there's a lot of talk, nationally about, and Mark bared witness to it. I'm sure you did too. When the gap between the Big Ten and the SEC was a lot wider, you know what I mean? Believe you me, I lived through the later 2000s, the 2010s, into that period. I do think around 15, 16, 17, the Big Ten started to close that gap a little bit. Compared to where it was like in that 2010, 2011, 2012 time frame, when I don't think that maybe the Big Ten wasn't even the second best conference in college football at that particular period of time. The Big 12 might have even been a better conference at that particular period of time. But I do think in particularly 15, 16, 17, and even into 18, I think the gap was a lot closer than it was at that time frame. To that point, just what you think now, living in an NIL world, in a portal world that we are in college football, and especially with what we've seen the last 2 years, is it fair to say, and I will say no less than the king of the SEC himself, or the self-proclaimed king of the SEC, Mr. Paul Feinbaum, is on record as saying that the Big Ten is the better of the two conferences. Can it be said right now, or your thoughts on the comparison between the two conferences in the college football world we live in now?
Well, since Mark is back, he decided to come on late night.
Sure,
back
Mark, go ahead.
And yeah, you take it first, and then I'll follow up with that because I need a little break from talking. This is our show, not my show. But
okay.
So yeah, go ahead. Let Mark take the reins on that, and then I think I'm gonna surprise some folks too with what I have to say about it. But yeah, let Mark get in a jab here on what he thinks on that.
Well, for the record, I defer to Leanne because number one, I'm a gentleman. Number two, it's my channel and I can talk 24 hours a day if I want to. So I can come on here anytime. But just to set the record straight, yeah, we got a USC show. And I told those boys, I said, you can do a show, right? I get you started. Boom. Go ahead. Roll with it. So I'm back. You didn't get rid of me. All right. When it comes to the SEC and the Big Ten, I believe that the SEC is still the better conference top to bottom. But I also don't believe that most people are that invested in who the 10th or 12th best team in any given league is. And I think that the Big Ten is slightly better at the top, as indicated by Ohio State and Texas, and the Georgia loss, of course, not to a Big Ten team, but to Notre Dame, and the various results that we saw at the top of the conference. But that's one season. I think it's a big and strong indicator for the Big Ten, but it's one season. We're going to see an NFL draft tomorrow where, once again, I would expect that the SEC is going to have the most players drafted, and the Big Ten is going to be a solid number 2, as has been the case for most of the last 15 years. So I think we've had this conversation, David, and until I see more football, I'm going to stay with the SEC being the better conference from top to bottom and from top to about 10. But that the Big Ten might be better in the top 3 or 4 spots.
Okay. I know you've stated that opinion before, Mark. Leanne, what do you think?
Well, like Mark says, when you're looking at the long-term historically, the SEC, the longevity that it has, it takes the cake. But when you're looking right now in the present, because again, we could sit there, we could talk about all the success of the SEC, but if we're looking in the here and now, the Big Ten's definitely made big strides. I think that they've definitely become a competitor. Obviously, we saw how the national championship worked out, and whatnot. So you got to look at it when we're looking at the present and we're looking at the current. The SEC is still a stronger conference. I mean, we could take it from a lot of different points. It really comes down to what you're measuring it by. Are we measuring it by conferences that, like Mark said, are going to put guys in the NFL draft, or are going to have those numbers? Are we looking at guys that programs that have the most wins across the board? are we looking at the here and now? But historically, I think the SEC still is the front runner when it comes to the longevity, having the long-term success and the evolution of the playoffs to the era we see now. But I think that, the Big Ten Conference has made a lot of strides. I mean, we've seen it in the present. Obviously, the college football is another indicator. So again, I think it's just a matter of perspective. But I do think that both conferences are the stronger two that we see present in comparison to what the Big 12 once was in the ACC. Now, if you're talking about the two top conferences, I think that the SEC and the Big Ten right now, take the cake as far as in the present versus in the long haul.
Yeah, I would say, and I think that Mark would probably say this is a safe bet. Maybe you will as well. That of probably the next 10 national champions, I think it's a safe bet that all 10 or 9 of the 10 are probably going to come from one of these two conferences. Would that be a fair statement, Mark?
Well, if we take Notre Dame out of the mix,
okay,
it's not being
that might be the one
conference. Yeah, but if you're just looking at conference to conference, I think that there are only 3 schools that I can see winning a national championship outside of these two conferences, and none of them play in the Big 12. And they all play in the Southeast, and they are Clemson, Florida State, and Miami, because they have proven capable of having the resources and the fan base and the brand and everything involved to make a run to win a national championship.
I do think the collectives have been a big contributor in closing the gap. No doubt about it. Portal. I mean, listen, proximity to talent is proximity to talent. That's what this sport is about, the acquisition of talent. I get it. And the SEC footprint is the SEC footprint. And once, we had population shift years ago, that's where really the transition happened. Let's just be real here. Texas is Texas for a reason. They got a lot of people there. I mean, you can't get around people. I mean, it's a finite resource. Let's just be real. But being in one of the few states in the Midwest that, and I think I saw Ohio produces the 5th or 6th most players in the NFL. It might be either 5, 6, or 7, I think is where I saw it. It could give or take by a few each year, Mark. Maybe you've seen the numbers recently. But, I do think that, and you have some other good footprints in our area, that DMV area in Maryland, Virginia, that area is really good. Pennsylvania is still pretty strong. And I think now bringing in the West Coast into the Big Ten is only going to help to have the California base. So as far as proximity to talent, which is always what we talk about in this sport, what you guys talk about when it comes to acquiring talent, I think is only going to help this conference. And I do think when right, you can have 5 major programs. USC guys are hosting a show right now. If they could come to the party here eventually, you could have 5 really strong programs in this conference. And that's pretty good, at the top, that are all capable, I believe, of winning national championships.
Most NFL players by state, listen to the first 6. They have a commonality.
Yeah.
Texas number 1, 304. Florida 287. California 278. Georgia 221. North Carolina 105. Louisiana 102. Ohio 99.
Okay. So give or take on a year, we could pass Louisiana next year, Mark.
Sure.
Give or take. So that's really nothing. But Georgia's been the big state in the South that's come up because Ohio's population is stated we're the 7th most populated state in the country. But Georgia's population isn't anywhere near. Well, it's not near ours, or it's not certainly near Texas's or Florida's. But I
don't know about that, David.
Well, what's the population of the state of Georgia,
I'll tell you here in a second, but Georgia is adding population. I saw something where Georgia's going to pass New York like in the next 15 years.
Okay, maybe it was more recently, but I didn't know that they were as populated as we were as a state. In a way, I was giving them credit by saying that, by the way. For them to have less people. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
While Mark's looking that up, again, we talk about the teams that put guys into the NFL, but again, it always goes back to what places, what programs are translating those guys at the NFL. Not only are they developing, that's always a big thing for me, when it comes to the NFL draft, are the guys that are going to really translate onto the field, because we see a lot of guys that go high up in those first rounds, get paid a ton of money, and we see that their careers flop because maybe they aren't the right fit and things like that. So it's just like, again, a lot of metrics, but a lot of interesting things. And Mark mentioned, Miami, Clemson, some of those other places. And I think too, in conferences like the ACC, and we were talking about it with one of the callers earlier, in the Big 12, those are conferences, and potentially, out with USC, those are potential hubs where you could attract a lot of top tier talent that maybe is not going to go to Alabama, maybe is not going to go to school, because again, those rosters are saturated, but they're willing to go take their talents to Miami or to Clemson or to Iowa State. We're talking about that earlier, because they have immediate playing time. So if you play your cards right and you get a roster, now it may be a one and done roster, you may have a good run, but for a season, you could potentially, if you play your cards right, if you recruit from the portal, if you recruit from that, take a good, strong talent from that high school, that that you can get to stick around, because one of the biggest incentives is that we see a lot of these kids, they want to play. Those days of sitting down and waiting, even at a place like Alabama, even at a place like Ohio State, they're far and few in between. Guys don't want to sit and wear that pride of a jersey. Now, that's not every guy that's coming out there, but these kids want to get playing time. Because again, some of these kids, especially the transfer guys who come in with 1 year of eligibility, they don't have any film, but they have a desire and aspiration to play at the NFL. They know if they don't have any film, and we're not talking about, being on the practice team or film from spring ball. We're talking about reputable reps at a Power 4 school, or even, some of these other smaller schools. And I think too, that's the edge that a lot of people don't talk about, as much as we talk about all the roster building going on in the Big Ten and in the SEC. But again, those ACC schools, those Big 12 schools, you got to watch out for them, because they could make a run. And I say that because if they play their cards right and they get the right roster of talent, because they can offer, they may not be able to offer $2.5 million quarterback contracts, but what they can offer is immediate playing time, where a kid could easily build their stock, whether it be a young guy coming in from the high school level, or whether a transfer that's looking to get seen by NFL talent.
Right. And then, recruiting is also more nationalized nowadays. It's not just, in this state, I go to play at this school. It's a lot more nationalized than it ever used to be. So, yeah, by the way, I know you got a couple other callers. A great conversation. It was, by the way, a good chance to finally be able to talk to you. I've heard you on Mark's show, and
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Do some great work, Mark. Good to see. I'm not going to call you the hardest working man, because I know you don't like that, but you continue to do good work, my friend. And hopefully tomorrow you're going to come back with another call-in show for us.
I believe we're going to look at the NFL draft. Yeah.
Yes.
We'll take calls tomorrow night. Absolutely. Yep. We'll do that. And just for the record, Ohio population 11.9 million, Georgia 11.2.
Okay, so a little bit less, but gaining. Yeah, that Georgia area.
They're knocking on the door.
Yeah. That's why all that talent's coming out of there. It's that population size. It's incredible. All right. Yeah. We'll have to see who my lowly Browns draft tomorrow, Mark. Not good.
We'll have to talk about it.
All right, my friend.
Right, David.
Good night, guys.
Thanks.
Take care. Good conversation.
Night.
All right, so we'll hit the super chat before we take our final two calls. Daniel, why, Daniel, what are we talking about? Who are we talking about? Anyway, thank you for the super chat, Daniel. Be nice. All right, next up, I believe, is Adam Stern. Adam, how you doing tonight? Thanks for
Mark. How you doing? Hey, Leanne, how are you?
Hey, Adam, good to have you on. Saw you did that emergency Rutgers transfer portal, man. It's getting crazy. Everybody's trying to hit a lick before Friday and closing. We had a lot of portal news, but we've turned this into a call-in show, so might as well run with it.
Yeah, it's been a great show. Thanks for having me on. I just have one question. I won't take up much of your time. So, Mark and Leanne, my position ever since the college football playoff has started is that in selecting the 12 best teams, record should not matter as much as it currently does because there are teams with 3, 4, and even 5 losses that are still among the 12 best in the country. For example, DJ Lagway in Florida, in my view, were among the 12 best teams in the country last year. They ended the season by defeating LSU and Ole Miss and soundly defeated Tulane in their bowl game. South Carolina had 3 losses and defeated Clemson at Memorial Stadium, yet Clemson got the bid to the playoffs. Now, my proposition would be that Florida and South Carolina were better than SMU, Boise State, Arizona State, and Indiana. And there's a reason why in the NFL you have wild cards. Teams like the New York Giants, who in 2007 went 10-6, but went on to beat the 15-0 Patriots to win the Super Bowl. So my question for you is, do you agree with the proposition that records should not matter as much and that Florida and South Carolina were indeed among the 12 best teams in the country that should have been in the playoffs over teams like Boise, SMU, Arizona State, and Indiana?
I'm a quality versus quantity kind of person. And so I do believe in strength of schedule. I don't think that, as much as I don't want to take away from teams like SMU, Indiana, I've said it all even before, the playoff system was intact. I knew that we needed to, have the playoff system and, possibly even go for an expansion here in the near future. But I do agree that, simply building those postseason wins, especially into the playoff, if you really wanted to get competitive, that the system has to be realigned. And I think where it goes with me, I'm right there with you, Adam, is that you have to consider quality versus quantity, and you have to look at strength of schedule. You have to look at where those wins and losses come from. So I'm going to agree there. I think that's something down the road that we're going to have to look at. But we're also, I believe, we have to create an opportunity for teams like SMU, some of those smaller schools, just like we do in college basketball, just like we do in college hoops. Obviously, I wouldn't want to see a playoff that big for college football. I don't think it's ready for that. I don't think we're going to be ready for it anytime soon. But I do believe that it's got to be a quality versus quantity thing. Like you said, you can go in there and you can have a 10-win season, but are you going to put that up a 10-win season, in a small conference versus your, a 10-2 versus, having, less wins, but more quality wins. So I'm definitely a proponent of looking that they have to evaluate strength of schedule, who the opponents that their wins and losses are. And I think that has to become a proponent down the line with the playoff system.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Leanne. And I think maybe a reasonable compromise would be if you extend it to 16 teams or whatever the amount is, you would give the SMUs an opportunity, but you would not under-include. So you can be over-inclusive while not being under-inclusive. I mean, like, for example, Mark, when Notre Dame played Indiana, I would have much rather have seen Notre Dame playing Florida or South Carolina and South Bend. They were the better team. So why this focus on Florida 7-5 and South Carolina's 9-3 when South Carolina went to Memorial Stadium and defeated Clemson? I think that's something that should be examined. And last thing I'll say is, Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think ideally we want the 12 best teams in the country to be playing in the playoff. And if there is a way to determine that I don't know about, then somebody please come to the forefront and tell us that, because it's impossible to know who the 12 best. God knows who the 12 best teams in college football are. None of us do. But obviously we have to work with what we have. And I totally get your point, Adam. And I would say that you and a faction of college football fans are in one bucket. The other side says we want to see teams earn their playoff spot, meaning regardless of who they play, regardless of the reality of the strength of schedule or the perception of it, we want teams to win games to earn their playoff spot. And then you've got your faction that say, we want the strength of schedule to be factored in heavily because we could have 7-5 teams that are better than 11-1 teams. Absolutely. What I am going to present here in the next few days, if I get enough time to work on it, is I'm going to present a scheduling system, because with all this college football playoff talk, it all gets focused on the number of teams that are in the playoff, whether that needs to be changed. It all gets focused on, should there be certain entry requirements for conferences and required number of bids for the SEC and the Big Ten? It all gets focused on number of buys and how you should receive buys. I think what would be the starting point that would produce the kind of results that we want, where we can more accurately evaluate these teams, is to fix the scheduling. The schedules have to be fixed. So we're going to start there, and I think I can provide at least a framework of a format that is going to appease both your side that wants to see the best teams in the country, regardless of their record, play in the playoff, but also for the records to actually reflect more closely those best teams.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. And the last thing I'll say is just to make an analogy. If I'm a law school admissions officer and I see somebody from Dartmouth with a 3.4 GPA in chemistry, and I see somebody from Florida Atlantic with a 3.9 in communications, I'm going with the former. That was the problem this year. Florida should have been in. South Carolina should have been in. Not Boise State, not SMU. But Leanne, Mark, thanks for taking my call. I appreciate it. You guys, a great show, and thanks for listening.
Appreciate you. Thank you for calling in. Yeah, right. Thanks.
Take care.
Yeah. All right, and I believe we have reached the end of the line here with our buddy George stepping on the line. Yes, George. So patient.
Hey, I am patient. It gives me time to slam a couple more beers and take a puff. That's fine. I don't mind waiting.
Well, at least I know with you, George, that we're not going to have to put you on that DJ Lagway bandwagon because I see all that Florida gear behind you.
Oh, these rags? What are you talking about? I've had these forever.
The proud gator.
Okay, first of all, what are we talking about? We could never. Does everybody forget so quickly? We've never found 4 teams worthy of being in the playoffs. We always know 1 or 2 teams is going to win the whole thing. The other 2 are just window dressing. What are we talking about? 14 teams. You can't find 4.
That is a logical point when you're talking about quality versus quantity. I mean, you see it all the times during bowl games. There's always that team that's in there just not for window dressing because you know that their fan base is going to pay the money and the ticket sales to come out to make the TV ratings go high. So I can see that point.
My second point is everyone keeps saying contracts, right? For me to get on this show, every time I turn my tablet off and open it up and start over, I got to go through this little game with StreamYard. It's permission. They've got my next 7 firstborn kids. What are we talking about? Have you ever read one of those contracts from StreamYard or Google or anybody? So don't think getting a contract with a kid's going to change a damn thing. You can do anything you want with a contract. Everybody does it every day. You can break them, get a good lawyer, and move on. Contracts ain't gonna do nothing.
We did. It's just crazy to see how much the legal standpoint, the legal aspect is really taking over the game. We didn't get a chance to hit on it, but we know that Arkansas right now, there's a lot of, like I like to say, widespread panic. A bunch of guys that really, could have potential, could have had some starting time there, or a mass exodus similar to what we saw at Texas A&M from that high-level recruiting class. But we didn't get a chance to talk about it. But since you're talking about it now, Arkansas right now is really feeling it. They are really. It's been going on behind the scenes, we know, with all this tampering, all sorts of mess. But, Arkansas took a stand today, putting out 2 letters of demand, as they like to call it, George, seeking that NIL money. There's 2 in particular freshmen that we're hearing. But, of course, we know Nico Amaleo's brother, Madden, making the move to go follow his brother over at UCLA. But, again, Arkansas is looking to recruit, so that's become a big issue. But we're seeing it now that in this age of NIL, it's becoming a lot like NFL, where these kids, like you said, they're buyouts. There's buyouts. I mean, this kid's gonna I think it's $200,000 that Arkansas is demanding that they recoup from this. So it's going to be really interesting. But yeah, it's kind of the sad part to see how much of that there's no longer going to be that amateurism in college athletics across the board. And now you're going to see, like I said, I see it with these young kids, even at the high school level, already having NIL representatives. Some of them even have their own lawyers. It's really interesting to see because it takes a lot away from the game.
I don't like where this is going, but I agree with you. This is going to turn teams like Arkansas and Kentucky and a lot of other good teams, legitimate teams, into feeder teams. They're going to get their 12 best teams. It's going to take a while, and everybody else is going to be a feeder team. And as far as contracts go, it depends on who has the most money. If Arkansas has unlimited funds, they could grind those kids to dust. The court case could still be going in 15 years. You know, they could be going to the Supreme Court. It depends on how much money you have to spend on lawyers. Well, if you cop an attitude and you have a lot of money, it doesn't matter how much money you lose. I'm just going to destroy the other guy, right? So, hey, listen to me. This requires ethics and morality for it to work. And apparently we've lost that. No kid will give you his freaking word and keep it. And if you don't think players will take a payoff now to lose a game, to drop a ball, to throw an interception, we've opened up a can of worms where people will do anything for $550,000. Who knows? A punter might do it for $40,000. I don't like this. If you watched Ole Miss versus Florida last year, you have to ask yourself, did Ole Miss throw that game? Right? You saw it. I saw it. We all saw it. And I'm a Gator. And I'm telling you, it looked like they threw the game.
You know, it opens up a...
How do you play that bad after being that good?
You know, you open up a lot of points, and now I think it's always, we've known that the dark side in college athletics has been going on for a long time. I think when I covered Kentucky, I really got to see it at the forefront before the era of NIL with college hoops and seeing, you know, how a lot of underhand, under the table deals were done in the hoops world. When NIL first started to translate into college football, you know, you would see these coaches, these recruiters. I said, you want to know how to handle this? Go talk to the college coaches that have coached at the college level in college basketball. This has been happening for a long time in college hoops. And I mean, we still see that college hoops has been able to contain it a lot better than football has. But, you know, it's just, and you bring up a good point, and I know a lot of people have brought up the good point. When it comes to where things are going to go, it's going to very much be similar, I think, one day as we head in that direction, as more teams and powerhouse programs start to really emulate the NFL style when it comes to their rosters, when it comes to, you know, OTAs and practice, how they operate. And we're going to see a lot of the guys who can't, the smaller guys, like you said, that can't keep up or who don't have the financial means, whether it be through NIL collectives, they're going to serve as feeder teams and they're going to serve as farm clubs, and it's going to be a minor league kind of call-up. It's really a crazy situation. And I think the most interesting thing as far as this whole Nico Amalavea family situation go is that he ends up at UCLA. His brother goes back, you know, follows him, takes a chance at, you know, leaves Arkansas, leaves the SEC, goes. But when it all comes said and done, where it ultimately started that he was wanting more money at Tennessee, he's not going to make that much money at UCLA. So it's really interesting to see what else is going to be offered, because this was a kid who was like, I'm sitting out of practice, I'm not taking phone calls, you know, really kind of turned heads, because this is not a kid who normally would act like this. From what I've seen from his high school recruitment days, when he was a highly, you know, recruited kid coming out of high school, dealt with a lot of the same pressures. But again, it just goes to show in the end of NIL and how families navigate, how quickly the circumstances can change. But, you know, this all started out with him going more money, but now he's going to a place where he's not going to make even what he made it at Tennessee. So it's kind of interesting to see how the table turns there.
Okay, listen, you don't pay college football coaches, you don't give them 10-year plus $10 million a year contracts with $60 million buyouts, except to turn their head and close their eyes and not mention certain subjects. That's what they're being paid for, not to coach football. They're being paid not to get on stage and say certain things. And they might let it leak out, like Arkansas will say something this time, and that'll get shut down. And you see what we're dealing with here. Private equity has already purchased everything on the universe. They even have Mars and Jupiter right here. So we're going to do whatever dumbass private equity wants to do. They don't give a shit. They know we're going to keep watching no matter what. No more Rose Bowl that matters. No more Pac-12. No more. It's all going away. You're going to get less teams. You're going to get 28 NFL teams or 32 teams, and suck on it, people. Screw all them small schools. You know how many thousands of colleges play football right now? It's going to 32. Screw everybody else. There goes about 1 million scholarships.
Yeah. And that's what hurts it most. When I was at Brown Ivy League school, we saw a lot of even before NIL started, we saw a lot of sports being cut because of financial means. And like you said, there's a lot of kids that are out there at the JUCO level, the FCS level, the FBS level right now that are gonna hurt because with all the scholarship changes and all the things, they're still trying to fight for a chance, trying to get on that big stage. So there's a lot of kids that aren't looking to go play at the NFL, but they want to play a sport.
Right,
so again,
right.
It's going to affect a lot of kids. And you're going to take away their dream because again, we become towards money hungry business. It just takes a lot away from the purity of the game. And for me, the hardest thing to see is seeing it trickle down even to the high school level in college football. I spent a lot of time on the recruiting trail, go to a lot of camps, go to a lot of 7-on-7. It's really interesting to see, even at the 7-on-7 level, how some of these top athletes, like I said, are already operating with deals. And like I said, with some of these states passing, NIL to be allowed even at the high school level. I have kids right now that I work with, that I help recruit, that already have deals. So, these kids potentially going into college could already make more money than some of those college athletes that are already making money. So you see, it's become extremely incentivized where you find it now. How are you going to get those players that that are really going to translate on the field? Are they just there for a deal? Are they for a paycheck? Are they going to play mediocre enough where they get paid? There's just so many twists and turns now that are trickling down. And like I said, it was coming to the college football ranks, but now it's, for me as a recruiter and a scout, seeing at the high school level is become really difficult to see, because you see a lot of talent that is just getting swayed with misdirection and the dark side of recruiting. So, I hate that for a lot of the high school kids, especially with portal and NIL and so many other factors now.
I know. All we have to do is sit and wait for what they're going to give us. It's going to take a few years. We'll know in 3 or 4 years what they're going to give us. You say you went to Brown. Is that right?
I did. Yes, I went to Brown.
Did you learn about Article 9 revised of the Uniform Commercial Code? Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? Securitized instruments? Yeah. Are you into that? Huh?
I didn't study a lot about it, but again, there's a lot of proponents like that. Brown was a proponent for Title IX, a lot of women's sports and all sorts of things.
No. I'm talking about Article 9. No, I was talking about Article 9, the Uniform Commercial Code revised. Did you do commercial law at all?
No, I didn't study commercial law but okay, yeah, that's going to be a big, I did. Brown doesn't have a law school. But I was on my way to law school before I gave that up to be a sports writer. But commercialization, all that kind of law is definitely going to be a proponent now, like I said, with the era of NIL and so many agreements. And, one of the things that I look at is that when you're talking about all the things that are going on with these kids with their name, image, and likeness, especially, that a lot of people don't realize that the slippery slope, one of many things is that these kids, it's not like in the NFL where you have to go, if you're going to go be an NFL agent, usually have a legal background, you're an ex-lawyer, you have to go get certified. Now, the sad thing about this is that a lot of these kids from the college level and at the high school level that are having what I like to call that NFL NIL representation are not being led by any type of people that have any type of legal background handling their business, any type of, you don't even have to be certified to be an NIL agent in most states. It's really kind of sad, the fact that all you have to go do is pretty much like opening an an LLC. You go in and say, hey, I want to be I want to operate as an NIL agent. You go pay the fee, the taxes, and boom, you're in business. And for me, that's what's going to be a very it's going to be a big downfall. And I think that that's one of the things that's going to have to be addressed sooner than later, because again, it's already extending where you got these kids, where we like to call them street agents, that are being navigated by these coaches, or these people that don't directly necessarily have a football background, a legal background, but they are representing and making contracts on behalf of these kids with no type of commercial law, contract law, all sorts of things. So again, it's just really,
so what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do with the state of Oregon? In the last 5 years, we have stopped giving kids report cards. You don't have to take a test anymore on reading, writing, arithmetic to go to college here. And you can become a bar member and take the bar. You don't have to go to law school in Oregon. So are we about to unleash these people on the United States of America? They're going to move to Illinois and Nebraska and Georgia. Look, I have a diploma. Look, I'm a lawyer. Mark, we need you to take control of it. Somebody needs to take control. Or Leanne, to defer to you. I'll touch on this one more time, just because this hits really home for me, and you bring up a lot of points that I think a lot of times that we don't talk about on the recruiting trail, that we talk about what's going on at the high school level. Again, like I said, when you got a lot of people that are trying to get to benefit from the cookie jar, the honey pot, from these talented kids, it turns things, and it tucks to the uglier side. And again, I think that one of the things that is going to eventually have to be regulated, and I always tell the recruits that I work with, remember, you got to go where you're loved and where you're fit. But remember, football could end all in a second. If you're going to go to college and you're going to get an education via being an athlete, also remember that you got to be educated, because a lot of times we talk about, I think we brought it up maybe a couple shows ago, how many NFL players, NBA players within the first 5 years after signing these big deals, these contracts, go broke. And why did they go broke? Because they are not educated in financial literacy. They're not educated in all these things. And that's one of my biggest things. I think that at some point and I think a lot of collectives at schools, I know Ole Miss is one of those places where, they're starting to educate their recruits and have programs and things like that, where they educate in financial literacy, acquiring skills, things outside of football, because no matter where you're going, one day it's all going to end. It's just how do you do it? And so that's kind of where I think it. Yeah, it's a crazy world out there.
All right, George.
I'm sorry, it was something I was doing on site. Hold on.
Well, the only thing I can say.
Okay,
George,
one last thing. Listen. Yeah. If anything happens to college football to make it unable for you guys to continue, we could start or keep this channel and do it. We could do state fairs. We could do 9 state fairs a year, right? And then we could do flea markets, my favorite restaurant. We will be here with you. We don't have to talk about football if you don't want to. Whatever you want to do, we'll be here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. And Leanne.
You guys proved that during one of the playoff games, when somebody started asking me music questions, and we sat here for 2 hours, and we actually gained viewers talking about music rather than football. Yeah, I believe you, George. The thing that I got to say about the issue that you just brought up, George, basically about the licenses being handed to everyone. That's just an ideology that is permeating society, as you will know, that you don't have to be a qualified pilot to get a pilot's license. You don't have to be a qualified this to get this is just, yes.
It gets scary. It gets scary when it's your doctor. You know what I mean?
Sure.
He's like, I typed it into the computer and it said, here, take some Ozempic, I just can't take it anymore. It's splitting my brain. How about, I like the idea about, let's do county fairs. That'd be fun. We could all go around.
That goes right into tailgating, man. You got me craving some fried Oreos and all that great stuff. Yeah, you can tailgate.
We can tailgate at the county fair. We don't need no stinking football.
I love it.
All right. Anyway, it was kind of weird. They got it all messed up. I'm glad we have DJ Lagway. Don't ever bet against DJ Lagway. It's like when you're at a casino and you're winning, just go with it. And if he loses one game, then you can reconsider. But until then, just bet on DJ Lagway.
I'm right there with you. He's my winning bet. Like I said, I've watched the kid. I used to have a saying with DJ's dad when I first saw it. There's something about that Willis, Texas, small town right outside of Houston, but always produces some top tier talent. Everybody was betting against DJ Lagway. I remember I had a lot of schools that were trying to recruit him, some big SEC schools that I was involved with, that they just didn't have a lot of vote of confidence. They said, yeah, he pans out, but we don't think he's going to translate to the next level. He's a little young. Well, he's definitely proved a lot of those guys wrong. And I know some of those schools that were recruiting him and trying to flip him definitely are thinking twice about not going all in with DJ Lagway. But that's one guy you won't have to convince me of.
It's even bigger than that. This is sports equity. This is sports entertainment. Now, listen, they always have Tiger Woods 6 or 7 championships in 10 years. And then they have Shaq. And then they have that Kobe. And then they have Michael. And then they have this. DJ's one of those guys. They're going to ride him like a horse. They need their next Tom Brady or whatever. It's all in the 10-year plan. They need their superhero so we can buy some jerseys, And I'm glad he's on my.
And just to go, we talk a lot about the dark side of recruiting and all that, but one thing you got to love about DJ Lagway, aside from his great talent, I know he's been battling a little bit of injury this season, but I've seen that kid walk through a lot of injury in high school and still come out on top with that mobility he has. But man, this is a kid that's really, since he's got here, even being so young with all his NIL deals, giving back to the athletic program, really just being a community stable. I mean, he's always constantly in there, and that's what you got to love. I know we talked a little bit about it, but if you're going back to what a Heisman should really embody outside the skill and talent, man, DJ Lagway is one of those kids for me. He from the jump when he got there, age is just a number, but his talent along with what he does with the Florida Gator community, and not just for football, but for all the teams, especially with women's sports, you can't help but be a fan of DJ Lagway all the way. He's not only winning ball games, man, he's winning over that student body.
Yep. I don't know anybody else that can have 3 defensive linemen hanging off of him and throw a 40-yard touchdown pass. He's like, get off of me. That's good stuff, man.
He is. He's, like I said, and he's a fighter, and he's going to work through a play. But, yeah, thank you so much for calling in, George.
See you guys next time. Love you all.
See you, George.
All right.
Bye, chat.
All right. We did it.
We did it. We made it through. It's 10 o'clock here on Central Time, and it's 11 o'clock over there in Florida. And we did not make it through our draft stuff. We did not make it through Miami, but man, we did have some fun. We should, but hey, I mean, this is what it's about. It kept us fresh. We talked about it. Where else are you going to go at this hour and talk about Iowa State making a run and all these kind of things, man? So it's been fun. We enjoyed all the callers coming in. I love all the scenarios because that's what you got to love about college football. There's so much more than the teams that we always talk about, and I was glad to talk about some dark horses in there.
And Leanne, when you're here, I don't have to answer any questions.
And I feel like I'm overtaking it because this is our show. This is not my show. But again, I thought, well, when our Iowa State guy called in, I could have sworn he was talking about Iowa, and I was about to defer it to you because I know that you're part of the Iowa show. You could probably answer a lot more than I could, but it was Ohio State. But again, like I said, we're going to call at this hour, whether you're a subscriber or not, and be able to shoot the shit about college football, about legal contracts. Like I said, when we say we're on the move and we cover all aspects of the portal, recruiting, whatever you want, we really do mean it. And look, hey, Mark even jumped back on. He said he told the USC guys that they were on their own, and he threw me into the water a little bit because I needed to swim. But yeah, thanks for coming back. You can't do it without you.
Fine. Once I jumped back in, I thought she probably doesn't even want to see me jumping back in here. She's got it down.
No, because I need somebody else to bounce back with. I mean, that's what makes our show unique, because it's all a matter, where I don't want to hear myself talk about recruiting. I want someone to to debate with and someone to talk it out with. And like I said, good stuff going on. So I don't know if we're going to close the show or we're going to try to hit some stuff. I know that you're tired, so we're on. So I don't know what are we going to do from here.
Well, we've got some notes to go through. I guess we can hit them right now if you've got it in the tank.
I do. We might as well close it out. I mean, we're already here 2 hours. What's a couple more minutes? So I think we left off on Michigan. I think that's where we started about Michigan. Hit a little bit on that. We already talked about Arkansas and all that going on. So yeah, I guess we go back to the top.
You've counted here 31 players to the portal, and they lose an edge rusher in Quinshon Bennett.
Yeah, when I saw that number, as much as Michigan has been having success on the portal, on the recruiting trail, we know that they've been hosting a lot of top guys, really in the mix for some top high school guys coming in. When I saw that 31, and this is not from spring portal, this is across from the winter and spring portal, but this makes the third edge rusher that's about to be on the move and look for greener pastures. Now, the question is it going to be greener on the other side? This is a guy who spent 4 seasons out in Ann Arbor. He saw action in 24 games. And not only did he, back up on the defense, he also played a little bit of special teams. So, that's a unique situation where a team could be looking for what I like to call a utility player, a guy that that you can use him in, multiple roles. It's kind of like a twofer. You get more for your buck. Overall, he didn't have a lot of strong numbers out there. He had 7 tackles, 1 quarterback hurry, 1 block kick. Again, he's the 31st player to leave Ann Arbor for greener pastures, but he makes the 3rd edge in this portal run to leave Michigan. I don't think Michigan has a lot to worry about, despite that number. I know that, for me, I had to step back because I was like, wow, Michigan losing 31 players between the spring and the winter portal window. But again, for every player that they've lost, they are reloading. I don't think Michigan is in any bad shape. But again, a lot of these guys we see moving on because maybe they haven't got playing time, or like a guy like Quinshon Bennett, who's put up some numbers but really hasn't been able to produce a lot as far as what he wants in the future. So again, Michigan losing their 3rd edge rusher of the portal and their 31st player of spring and winter and spring.
Quinshon Bennett finding himself in a position where he's trying to make a depth piece on the 2 or 3 deep on a defense that might be the best in the country coming up this year. So difficult situation for him. Michigan will be fine. And again, you kind of ran through the Arkansas situation with them losing a number of pieces and possibly some panic there at Arkansas. And part of that also has to do with them, of course, the Madden Iamaleava situation and following his brother, where it's interesting that he originally signed at UCLA. He flipped to Arkansas and then he flips back to UCLA. So he's gone as well. I don't know if there was anything else that you wanted to hit on concerning that situation.
Well, like we said, Madden obviously at the headline, and the NIL at Arkansas, the collectives have said, we talked about 2 letters of demand, demanding the retribution for Madden leaving under his contract. I believe the number they put out there was $200,000. Now he is at the forefront of that NIL retribution, recoup, whatever, but there is also a couple of unsaid players. We haven't got confirmation as far as those names, but within the last 24 hours, we've seen a lot of young guys exit on offensive tackle in Zuri Madison. The QB/former pitcher for Arkansas, Austin Ledbetter, is on the move. Tight end Shamar Easter and running back Julius Pope. So those are just 4 guys from that Arkansas portal since that news broke. Again, we are not sure who those other freshman guys are, but we're hearing that they are freshmen or they are young guys that Arkansas is definitely looking. Of course, we know that the Arkansas AD got on board, and he said that he really wants to make sure that he is very steadfast in recouping not only the money from Madden, but also enforcing the rules for the buyouts when these guys leave. Because again, you got to take it stand at some point, because we've seen it We've seen, a lot of guys be on the move, and by on the move, we're talking literally on the move. They come in December. They don't like the way things play out in spring, and they are gone by spring portal. So again, we know that spring portal window closing on Friday. So a lot of guys making big decisions, not about what's going on, on the football field as far as that, but also making big decisions based on what we've talked a lot about, unfortunately, the legal state, the politics that, college football has turned into because of NIL and other moving parts.
The NFL draft kicks off, of course, on Thursday, and Miami's going to face a number of key losses. Of course, Cam Ward's going to be possibly the number one player off the board, but even a number of players, their top wide receiver, Xavier Restrepo, and their best pass rusher, Tyler Barron. So a number of losses from Miami across the board, and they're trying to fortify their ranks through the transfer portal. And folks, if you check out the Miami show with Cam Underwood and myself from a couple hours ago, we ran down AJ Halsey, a guy that Leanne's very aware of coming out of the University of Houston. And when a guy for a 4-8 football team becomes a first team all conference selection, you know that he's done big time work. And Halsey did with 5 interceptions this year.
He's got a great build, 6 foot, 215, really speedy. We've been breaking him down all day. He was at Miami Wednesday evening. We are officially almost to Thursday, but he's been on campus this evening. It seemed like Miami had a really big push for him. And again, I go back to saying, as much as, a kid like Halsey, he was set to be another staple on that secondary for the Houston Cougars after 2 seasons. But again, a lot of these guys looking for whatever reason to move on. But Miami seem to be at the forefront. And I go back not just because of the talent they're trying to build and what they can offer, but a note that the current Miami defensive back coach, Zach Etheridge, has a strong relationship with Halsey. And I think that a lot of people kind of were surprised at why maybe Miami was in the forefront. But I think it goes back also to him, because it's a good note that while he's at Miami right now, he was Halsey's DB coach while he was at Houston. So again, going back to relationships matter, but Miami does not have it in the bag by any means. We heard earlier today that LSU, I said it from the jump, that with a kid like this, with his kind of resume, how it translates his experience to the field, that he was going to have some schools calling. And I wasn't surprised that it was going to be an SEC school. Of course, I thought possibly Ole Miss would maybe be on the horn with them, trying to get into this tough recruitment because they are looking to rebuild their secondary. But the Bayou Bengals are on the move and looking to possibly pull a fast one on Mario Cristobal. So again, another talented safety on the board. He prior to Houston, I talked about earlier on our Ole Miss show that he was with New Mexico as a true freshman, made All-American team, set the lead, was in the lead for leading tackles as a true freshman in the country while he was at New Mexico. Put all sorts of numbers on there. Like I said, this is a kid, point blank, has a sixth sense in reading and dissecting offenses. He has it down to an art. He's the sort of defender that I put on my notes that can really interrupt routes, attack immediately. He shows the strongest when he's in the deep downfield position. But I think where a point that he really excels is when he's close to that line of scrimmage. Again, his instincts that I didn't mention earlier, but it's really good. I think it's a really strong suit that you don't often see with a guy of his ability, is that he plays the wrong really strongly. However, for him, what really stands out to me, aside from his physicality, is that he's really able to differentiate, Mark, between running the alley versus just simply the run. And I think that's a key component when you're looking for a strong secondary player. Again, one of the biggest things, we always talk about the upside to these guys. And again, he has tons of attributes, why you can see why Miami's going after him, why LSU's going after him. But one of the main concerns, obviously, that has been, brought to the table, but I think that he's made strides from his time at New Mexico to Houston, is that he's often talked as his over-aggression as a tackler has often caused him to miss key opportunities, missed blocks, and everything. But again, that's not something that I would take away from the table and trying to sign this guy. So again, Miami meeting with him this evening down in South Florida. But again, we're hearing LSU is very much trying to get in the mix and emerging as another possibility for AJ Halsey coming out of Houston.
That's at the safety position for the Canes. At corner, looking at K-State player Noah King.
Noah King, this is where it could get really interesting. This is a true freshman who has cornerback experience, but at the next level, because he's about 6'2", 200 pounds, Miami will probably be recruiting him as a safety. He was there on Tuesday. This is a kid out of Ohio, 4-star recruit out of Hamilton High School in that 2025 class. Really hasn't had, again, an opportunity to do a lot, but again, could be a staple, a fresh young piece. When he was set to when he visited Miami, there was no scheduled visits. This is what you got to love about the portal. We saw how Houston just lost one of their top safeties, also lost one of their cornerbacks to the portal. Now we're hearing that Noah King has set some multiple visits. So of course we know he's already made a stop to South Florida to Miami. He'll be hitting Miami, Ohio on Sunday, but here's where the kicker is. He's not going only to visit Houston for 1 but 2 days. So potentially we could see an interesting flip where Miami could land former Houston safety in Halsey, but replenish it with another guy that they're trying to recruit and convert over at Houston. Colorado is also set to get a visit that following Tuesday and Wednesday. So again, and the quick thing about it, which you got to love about the transfer portal, is that Houston and Colorado just offered earlier today. So it's going to be an interesting time down in South Florida. But again, we know that Mario Cristobal is not only looking to rebuild his roster, but again, the concern for many top tier programs looking to make a jump is that secondary. And again, they definitely have room to sign these 2 potential top guys, but Noah King could be trading places with Halsey over at Houston if they play their cards right.
Miami's losing its top power running back in Damian Martinez, transfer in from Oregon State that played 1 season, should be in the NFL draft sometime this weekend, probably a day 3 guy. And they've got Mark Fletcher coming back, one of the best backs in the nation, but they need depth, and they're looking at a North Dakota State product.
A lot of the high profile running backs that we've seen that have gone in the winter and in the spring transfer portal have come from those smaller schools. In Miami, definitely looking to build that depth piece in North Dakota. Running back Shamar Brown, he was at Miami on Tuesday. We said that we're hearing that things went really well and strongly about that. He's also expected to head over to the West Coast and look at Cal, and then go back into Cornhusker country, and also set a visit to Nebraska. But this is a kid who has a lot of potential. He won the Jerry Rice Award in this past season. He rushed for 1,181 yards and 15 touchdowns as a freshman. So again, another strong candidate who has a lot of potential, looking for that big stage. Miami looking to get him and solidify him, but they will battle against Nebraska and Cal.
Defensive lineman Braxton Feely is also a Miami target.
This has become one of the top defensive linemen in the portal. It's really gotten a lot of buzz. He was also in Miami on Tuesday. Another strong visit. Obviously, we know he's from Boise State. He's already taken a look at Cal, and he's a kid who's lining up a long set of visits because, again, a lot of big programs are looking at him. Some of the schools that he's set to see is Texas A&M, TCU, Ole Miss, are some of the top guys we're hearing. But from the visit and what we're hearing that Miami is at the forefront after all those visits. Again, this could be a good spot for him to land, just because he's a young guy, willing and looking for a place to play. All these players that we talk about, it's not that at their respective schools that they're not getting the playing time, but for most of these guys, they're looking, especially for these FBS guys, are looking to step it up, and that's why Miami has become such a hotbed for some of these top candidates in the transfer portal.
At wide receiver, we talked about this guy out of BYU earlier today on the Ohio State show because actually the Buckeyes are looking at one Keelan Marion, who caught 20 passes 2 years ago, 24 this past season, but he could also be heading to South Florida.
Well, as much as the Canes had a lot of productivity on that offense, they didn't necessarily have the best arsenal at wideout. So again, another concern that Mario Cristobal had to address was expanding that wideout room. And wide receiver Keelan Marion out of BYU is one of those guys that is coming one of the top wide receivers available in the portal. Now he's set to visit. He's set to be on campus out at Miami on Friday is what we're hearing. He's also looking at SMU and Tennessee. He's already made a stop at Arizona State. And so it'll be really interesting to see, where his recruitment goes. But they're going to have to battle a lot of competition. We're hearing trying to acquire his talent. Of course, like I said, Tennessee definitely looking to get some high profile weapons with that Joey Aguilar commitment. So much like other schools, trying to build that arsenal, they're going to have to battle. But Keelan Marion, one of the top wide receivers in the portal that's available, has a lot of visits set ahead. But again, Miami not so much at the forefront. We're hearing again SMU, Tennessee set to get visits. So Tennessee would be out of that bunch. Tennessee would be the team to watch in this recruitment.
Yeah. Syracuse threw the ball as much as anybody in the country with Kyle McCord, who we should see in the NFL draft going off the board from Syracuse to the NFL. And so some of these wide receivers, we talked about Syracuse's quarterback battle that is just heated up with Ricky Collins from LSU and also Steve Angeli coming in from Notre Dame. But they will not most likely have the threat in Trevor Pena, who caught 84 passes and 9 touchdowns this past season.
Yeah, again, this is a kid who had potential if he would have stayed at Syracuse, but again, many moving components, many moving doors. He's fresh off a visit to Penn State. Some of the other places he's looking at that he will be battling is at UCLA, of course. I mean, UCLA probably is going to have a lot of recruiting hype, considering that the family of quarterbacks that they have inked officially. So UCLA definitely on the radar for Trevor Pena. Another, obviously, Miami is the one that we're talking about. Now, in this one, while Miami is trying to make the pitch that, having Carson Beck at that signal call position, the possibilities are endless trying to get hot in that red zone. But in this one, despite obviously UCLA being in a strong mix, I think what we're hearing from what I hear that Penn State is the one to watch and is coming off a really strong visit. He really had, from all those opportunities that have been forementioned for him, it really seems like Pena is leaning toward Penn State and really could be a standout there. So it'll be interesting to see which take, but Penn State seems to be in the forefront of his recruitment. But again, a lot could change, especially with that UCLA and then the Miami visit ahead. So a lot of interesting recruits, but again, Mario Cristobal looking to build that talent on both sides of the ball, especially in that secondary, and definitely looking to address that wideout room nonetheless, but he's trying to build it with that instant impact via the transfer portal. So definitely things are heating up and the storm is brewing down in South Florida.
I'm going to break in with this one fresh off the presses, and we anticipated this one and talked about it during our Ohio State show, but losing 3 NFL draft selections just on the defensive front, Ohio State going after Bo Atkinson, and it's being reported that they got him, and that's just coming down in the last half hour. Bo Atkinson at North Carolina, 13 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, an impact player off the edge. So again, Ohio State gets a good one in Bo Atkinson from UNC. And then besides that, I did want to hit also another recent addition to the transfer portal is Justin Flo, who's a former top 10 defensive player. I can't find the listing here, but regardless, Justin Flo out of Oregon, originally signed with the Ducks, then went to Arizona. He's back in the transfer portal as well.
Well, just because I saw it here across the board, Incarnate Word, for those of you who don't know, that's where Cam Ward got his start, just up the way here in San Antonio, Texas. I believe that That kid, he's probably going to be a high value wide receiver. Incarnate Word, UTSA, some of these smaller schools right here in San Antonio have become a hotbed in recent years for producing top wideout talent. So that kid hitting the board is definitely going to get some calls for some big schools. I don't, like I said, haven't had a chance to film, but it's ironic you pulled him out because, like I said, a lot of these bigger schools are going to some of these smaller schools, much like we talked about. I think eventually we'll see that. And I think some of the FBS and FCS schools and even the JUCO schools have really embraced the fact that they've become feeder schools for Power 4 programs. And they are definitely okay with that. So I think that's going to be an interesting take. But again, that kid off Incarnate Word, I'm sure if his phone's not ringing now, it will be, just on the fact because Incarnate Word has become one of those hubs to really develop players. We saw what they did with Cam Ward, and and they've sent a lot of guys up to the big leagues, as we want to call it.
Folks, please like and subscribe here at the Voice of College Football, and also consider a super chat contribution. And before we head for the exits, Leanne, anything on the eve of the NFL draft?
I think that we're going to wrap it up. I got too many notes on the NFL draft, so maybe I will pop in. We're gonna wrap it up. As much as I could probably go here and talk, I think that we want everybody to tune into your live draft special. So maybe I will pop in tomorrow and give my early thoughts on the way things go down. But I think it's going to be an interesting draft. I think the quarterback situation will be really interesting. But before I get off here, I'm going to give a little bit of love and be a little bit partial to one guy in particular, in JJ Pegues. I had this whole draft analysis picked up, but we talk about a lot of guys not being prototypical and not fitting the thing. But I think someone, again, my stone cold pick of the draft is JJ Pegues. I think that we talk a lot about Travis Hunter being a two-way player, but man, talk about JJ Pegues coming out a tight end that eventually was a defensive lineman who almost uses a short yardage running back. A lot of dynamic numbers. I wish I could sit here and do all the analysis, but again, maybe I'll pop on the show and maybe JJ Pegues is going to file, but just a little draft talk. Like I said, my stone cold pick for the NFL draft, JJ Pegues, Ole Miss.
All right, everyone, listen up. Please like the video on your way out. Subscribe if you're not subscribed here. Obviously, follow Leanne on X as well. And we'll make it on back here next tomorrow night for the NFL draft. Tomorrow night, not next week. And the big show here, the On the Move show, is here each and every week for you. And we're going to get back on prime time, I believe, next week. So we will see you then.
And thanks to everybody for calling in. We'll see you next week, and we'll definitely be on the move.